The gunshot echoed across the empty plains like a crack of thunder, and Elena Mercer knew immediately that she was going to die out here. Not from the bullet, though that burned hot enough in her side to steal her breath, but from the 40 miles of nothing that stretched between her and the nearest town. Silas had made sure of that when he'd ridden off with the stolen bank money, leaving her bleeding in the dirt with their 3-month-old daughter screaming in her arms. "Shut up, Clara," Elena whispered, though she didn't mean it. The baby's cries were the only sound keeping her awake, keeping her moving forward when every instinct told her to lie down and let the prairie take them both. "Just shut up for 1 minute so I can think." But there wasn't much to think about, was there? She was going to die. Clara was going to die. And Silas would spend that bank money on whiskey and cards in some Denver saloon, telling stories about the fat wife he'd finally gotten rid of. Elena pressed her hand harder against the wound, feeling hot blood pulse between her fingers. The fabric of her dress, already too tight across her chest and stomach before the shooting, now clung to her skin like a second layer of misery. She'd always been heavy. Even as a girl back in Missouri, she'd been the one boys laughed at, the one mothers pitied, the one store clerks looked past when pretty girls walked through the door. Silas had been different, or so she'd thought. He told her she was beautiful, strong, that he didn't want some skinny thing who'd break under the weight of frontier life. He'd made her feel seen for the first time in her 24 years, and she'd been stupid enough to believe every word. The memory made her angrier than the gunshot wound. "Keep moving," she muttered, adjusting Clara against her shoulder. The baby had stopped screaming and started that hiccuping whimper that meant she was hungry again. Elena's breasts ached with milk she couldn't afford to give right now, not when her body was already struggling to keep blood flowing to her brain. The sun was setting fast, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that would have been pretty if Elena had any capacity left for noticing pretty things. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, following the faint wagon ruts that cut through the short grass. Someone had come this way before. Someone had to come this way again. She just had to stay alive long enough to meet them. The prairie wind picked up, cold against her sweat-soaked skin, and Elena stumbled. Her knee hit the ground hard, sending a spike of pain up her leg that mingled with the constant throb in her side. Clara started wailing again, her tiny face scrunched and red. "I know," Elena gasped, hauling herself upright. "I know, baby. I'm trying." She was trying. She'd been trying her whole life, trying to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable to a world that looked at her body and decided it knew everything about her character. Trying to be the wife Silas wanted, cooking his meals and warming his bed, and never asking too many questions about where he went or what he did. She'd found the bank money by accident, hidden in a hollowed-out section of their wagon bed. $20,000 in neat stacks, wrapped in oilcloth. She'd been looking for the spare axle grease and instead found evidence that her husband was a thief. She should have kept her mouth shut. Instead, she'd confronted him that morning as they packed up camp, Clara fussing in her basket. "Where did this come from, Silas?" He'd gone very still, his back to her as he adjusted the horse's harness. "Put it back, Elena." "This is from a bank. This is stolen money. I said put it back. We can't keep this. They'll hang you if they catch us with—" That's when he'd turned around with the pistol in his hand. Elena had seen Silas angry before. He had a temper that flared quick and mean when he'd been drinking, but she'd never seen him look at her the way he did in that moment. Like she wasn't his wife. Like she wasn't even human. Just an obstacle between him and his money. "Silas, please." The shot had knocked her backward into the dirt, the impact somehow worse than the pain at first. She'd lain there gasping while he'd gathered up the money, unhitched his horse, and ridden away without looking back. Not even at Clara, who was screaming in her basket beside the dying fire. He'd left them both to die. And maybe they would. Maybe this was exactly what Elena deserved for being fool enough to trust a man who'd only ever loved her when it was convenient. But she'd be damned if she'd just lie down and let it happen. The wagon ruts led toward a line of darker shadow on the horizon. Cottonwoods, probably, which meant water. If she could just reach the trees, she could rest, clean the wound, figure out how to keep Clara fed for another day. 1 foot in front of the other, that's all it was. 1 foot in front of the other until her body gave out or help arrived, or the coyotes finished the job Silas had started. Elena lost track of how long she walked. The sunset faded to twilight, twilight to full dark, and still she kept moving because stopping meant dying, and she wasn't ready for that yet. Clara had cried herself into exhausted silence against her chest, dead weight in her arms, and Elena's entire world had narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of not falling down. Then she heard horses. At first she thought it was a hallucination, her brain conjuring rescue because her body couldn't take another step. But the sound grew clearer, hoofbeats, and the creak of leather, and a man's voice talking low to his animals. "Help!" Elena tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She tried again, louder this time, putting everything she had left into it. "Help, please!" The hoofbeats stopped. Silence stretched out long enough that Elena thought maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. Then a male voice called out across the darkness. "Who's there?" "Please," Elena gasped. "My baby. I need help." The sound of a horse moving closer, cautious. Then a dark shape materialized out of the night. A man on horseback, sitting tall in the saddle, one hand resting on what was probably a rifle. "Ma'am?" The voice was deep, careful, with the flat vowels of someone born to the territory. "You hurt?" "Shot," Elena managed. "My husband, he shot me and left. Please, I have a baby." The man swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. He moved closer, and Elena caught a glimpse of his face in the starlight. Maybe 30 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with a dark beard and eyes that were trying to assess whether she was a threat. "How long ago?" he asked, still keeping his distance. "This morning. I've been walking since... I don't know. Please." Elena's knees buckled, and she barely caught herself. "My baby needs..." The man moved then, covering the distance between them in 3 quick steps. He caught her before she fell, one arm around her back, careful to avoid the wound in her side. Up close, Elena could smell horse and leather and something cleaner. Soap, maybe. "Easy," he said. "I've got you. Let me see." He guided her down to sit on the ground, then gently eased Clara out of her arms. The baby whimpered, but didn't wake, and the man laid her carefully on the grass before turning his attention back to Elena. "This is gonna hurt," he warned, then probed the wound in her side with fingers that were surprisingly gentle. Elena bit down on a scream. "Bullet went clean through. That's good. But you've lost a lot of blood." "I need to feed her," Elena said, looking at Clara's tiny form on the ground. "She hasn't eaten since... First, we need to get you somewhere with light and clean water." The man stood, made a decision. "My ranch is closer than town. Can you ride?" Elena tried to stand and immediately collapsed back down. The man caught her again, and this time he didn't bother asking permission. He simply picked her up, baby and all, and carried her toward his horse like she weighed nothing. That was the first shock. Men didn't usually pick Elena up. Men usually made jokes about needing a crane or asked if she'd eaten the whole pantry. But this man just lifted her into his arms and settled her sideways on his saddle, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The second shock came when he swung up behind her and she realized how solidly he was built. Not just tall, but broad through the shoulders and chest, the kind of strength that came from years of hard work rather than just size. "What's your name?" he asked, gathering the reins and adjusting his hold so Elena was secure against his chest. "Elena. Elena Mercer." "Caleb Rowan." "Hold on, Mrs. Mercer. We've got about an hour's ride ahead of us." He clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving at a smooth walk. Elena tried to stay conscious, tried to keep her grip on Clara, but exhaustion was pulling her down like an undertow. The last thing she remembered before the darkness took her was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and Caleb Rowan's voice in her ear. "Stay with me. Don't you dare die on my horse. Upos." Elena woke to lamplight and the smell of carbolic acid. She was lying on something soft. A bed? An actual bed with clean sheets. In a room with log walls and a window showing dawn light. Every part of her body hurt, but especially her side, where someone had bandaged the gunshot wound with strips of white cloth. "Clara," she croaked, trying to sit up. A hand pressed gently against her shoulder, keeping her down. "Easy. Your daughter's fine. She's sleeping in the basket by the stove." Elena turned her head and found Caleb Rowan sitting in a chair beside the bed, looking like he hadn't slept all night. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and there was blood, her blood, Elena realized, dried on his forearms. "You cleaned the wound," she said. "Best I could. You need a proper doctor, but the nearest one is in Sweetwater, and that's a full day's ride. I figured stopping the bleeding was more important than moving you again." Elena closed her eyes, trying to process everything. She was alive. Clara was alive. They were in some stranger's house instead of dead on the prairie. "Why?" she asked. "Why what?" "Why did you help us? You don't know me. For all you know, I'm the outlaw." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Woman shot and left to die with a baby in her arms doesn't strike me as the outlaw type. Besides," he stood, moved to look out the window. "What kind of man would I be if I'd just ridden past? Most men would have. Most men are idiots." Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the bone-deep terror of the last 24 hours, Elena almost smiled. "You'll get no argument from me on that." Clara chose that moment to wake up with a piercing wail that cut through the quiet like a knife. Caleb flinched, and Elena tried to sit up again. "I need to feed her," she said. "Can you, in your condition?" "Don't have much choice. She's hungry, and I'm what she's got." Caleb moved to the basket and picked up Clara with the awkward care of a man who didn't spend much time around babies. He brought her to Elena, who took her daughter with arms that shook from weakness. "I'll step outside," Caleb said, already heading for the door. "Call if you need anything." He left before Elena could thank him, closing the door quietly behind him. Alone with her daughter, Elena opened her dress and guided Clara to her breast. The baby latched on desperately, and Elena gasped at the sharp pull of it, the way her body responded even though she felt half dead. This was what kept her going. Not survival instinct, not hope, but the simple biological imperative of keeping this tiny human alive. Clara fed for 20 minutes, then fell back asleep in Elena's arms. Elena held her, staring down at her daughter's face in the growing daylight. She had Silas's dark hair, but Elena's nose, her chin. A combination of them both, though Elena hoped to heaven that nothing of Silas's character had made it into their child. A soft knock came at the door. "Mrs. Mercer, you decent?" "Yes." Caleb came back in carrying a tray with bread, butter, and what smelled like beef broth. "You need to eat," he said, setting it on the bedside table. "Build your strength back up." Elena's stomach clenched with hunger at the sight of food. "I don't have any money to pay you." "Didn't ask for money." "Mr. Rowan?" "Caleb." "Caleb." Elena shifted Clara to one arm so she could gesture at the room, the food, the bandages. "All of this?" "I can't pay you back." "I have nothing." "Then you can pay me back when you have something." He pulled the chair closer and sat down. "Right now, you need to eat and heal and take care of your baby. The rest we can figure out later." Elena wanted to argue, but the smell of the bread was making her lightheaded. She reached for it with shaking hands and took a bite. It was good. Better than good. Fresh and soft and exactly what her body needed. Caleb watched her eat for a moment, then asked the question Elena had been dreading. "What happened out there?" She told him. Not everything, not about the years of small humiliations and building resentment, but the important parts. The stolen money, the confrontation, the gunshot. Silas riding away and leaving them to die. Caleb's face went hard as stone as he listened. When Elena finished, he was quiet for a long time. "We need to report this to the law," he finally said. "No." "Mrs. Mercer?" "Elena." "And no, if we report it, they'll start asking questions. They'll want to know why I married an outlaw, why I didn't turn him in sooner, whether I helped him spend any of that money. They'll judge me." She met his eyes. "You don't know what it's like, being a woman who doesn't fit what people expect. They'll look at me and decide I'm guilty of something just because of how I look. That's not—" "It is." Elena set down the half-eaten bread, suddenly not hungry anymore. "I've spent my whole life being judged for my size, Mr. Rowan, for being too heavy, too much, too visible. When you're a big woman, people think they can say anything to you. They think your body is their business. And if something bad happens to you—" She laughed bitterly. "Well, you must have done something to deserve it." Caleb was quiet again, and Elena couldn't read his expression. She expected disgust or pity, or that particular kind of embarrassment men got when women talked about their bodies. Instead, he said, "My mother was a big woman. Built solid, my father used to say. Strong as an ox and twice as stubborn." He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her. But I remember how people used to talk about her in town. like her size was some kind of moral failing, like she could have been a better person if she'd just been smaller. Elena stared at him. It made me angry then, Caleb continued. Still makes me angry now, because my mother was the kindest, strongest person I ever knew, and none of that had anything to do with how much space she took up in the world. Something in Elena's chest cracked open, not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked for years. When was the last time someone had understood without her having to explain? When had anyone ever compared her to someone they'd loved? I won't report your husband if you don't want me to, Caleb said. But Elena, that man shot you and left you to die. He's dangerous. And if he thinks you might talk, he might come back to finish what he started. The thought had occurred to Elena during her long walk across the prairie, but in that moment, bleeding and desperate, all she'd been able to think about was survival. Now, safe and fed and bandaged, fear crept back in. What do I do? She whispered. You heal. You get your strength back, and you let me help you figure out what comes next. Caleb stood, picked up the tray. This is a big ranch. I've got 3 ranch hands living in the bunkhouse and a cook named Martha who comes in from town every few days. You and Clara can stay in this room as long as you need to. No one's going to bother you here. Why are you doing this? Elena asked again. You don't owe me anything. Caleb paused in the doorway, looked back at her. Maybe I don't. But my mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when no one would blame them for walking away. He smiled slightly. I'm not walking away, Elena. So stop trying to give me reasons to. He left before she could respond. Elena sat in the quiet room holding her sleeping daughter and let herself cry for the first time since the shooting. Not from pain or fear, though both were there, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of being seen as something other than a burden. The first week passed in a blur of sleep and pain and Clara's needs. Elena's body fought hard against the infection that tried to set in, fever spiking and falling in waves that left her soaked with sweat and shaking. Caleb brought cold water and clean cloths, changed her bandages twice a day, and never once made her feel ashamed when she wasn't strong enough to do it herself. Martha arrived on the 3rd day, a weathered woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and gentle hands. She took one look at Elena and made a sound of disgust. Men, she muttered, checking the wound, always thinking they can handle everything with hot water and good intentions. You're lucky it's healing clean. Another day and this would have turned septic. Caleb saved my life, Elena said, defensive in a way that surprised her. Oh, I know, Caleb Rowan's one of the good ones, rare as that is. Martha rebandaged the wound with practiced efficiency. But he's still a man, which means he's got blind spots the size of Wyoming when it comes to what women actually need. She'd brought clean dresses, 3 of them, simple but well-made, in sizes that would actually fit Elena's body without cutting into her flesh or gaping at the seams. Elena had stared at them for a long moment, not quite believing what she was seeing. Where did these come from? She asked. Had 'em made, Martha said matter-of-factly. Caleb gave me your measurements, and I took them to Mrs. Chen in town. She's a seamstress, does good work. He measured me? Elena felt heat rise in her face. While you were sleeping, I imagine. Don't get your feathers ruffled. Man was just trying to help. Martha hung the dresses on pegs by the window. You need anything else? Undergarments? Shoes? I can't accept all this. I have no way to pay. You can accept it, and you will, Martha interrupted. Because right now you've got nothing but the bloody dress you rode in with, and that's no way for any woman to live. Take the help, Mrs. Mercer. Pay it forward when you're able. It was the same thing Caleb had said, more or less. Take the help. Pay it forward later. Elena wasn't used to help without strings attached. In her experience, every kindness came with expectations. Be grateful, be quiet, be smaller, be less trouble. But Martha just nodded once, picked up the basin of dirty water, and left without waiting for thanks. By the end of the week, Elena's fever had broken, and she could sit up without feeling like she was going to pass out. She still couldn't walk more than a few steps without pain lancing through her side, but she could hold Clara and feed her and change her without needing help. Progress. Caleb came to check on her morning and evening, always knocking first, always asking permission before entering. He brought news from the outside world. A cattle drive passing through, trouble with coyotes near the north pasture, a letter from his business partner in Cheyenne. He never mentioned Silas. Never asked Elena what her plans were or when she might be leaving. Just treated her presence at Rowan Ridge like it was the most natural thing in the world. On the 8th day, Elena finally made it out of bed and to the window. Rowan Ridge spread out before her in the morning light. A large ranch house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and beyond that, rolling grassland as far as she could see. Cattle dotted the landscape like dark stones, and in the distance, mountains rose up against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. It was beautiful. More than that, it was prosperous. The kind of property that took money and hard work and years to build. Caleb Rowan wasn't just some cowboy with a generous heart. He was a wealthy man, a landowner, someone with status in the territory. And he'd taken in a penniless woman with a bullet wound and an outlaw's baby. The door opened behind her, and Elena turned to find Caleb carrying a breakfast tray. He stopped when he saw her standing. "You're up," he said, and there was something like relief in his voice. "Getting there." Elena moved back toward the bed, trying not to wince at the pull in her side. "I've been lying down for over a week. Figured it was time to see what the world looked like vertical." Caleb set the tray down and gestured to the window. "What do you think?" "I think you have a beautiful ranch." "Thank you. Took me 10 years to build it up from nothing." He looked out at his land with obvious pride. "When I came here in '66, this was just open range. I bought the first 100 acres with money I'd saved from railroad work, then built it piece by piece. Now we're running close to 2,000 head of cattle." "That's impressive." "It's exhausting," Caleb corrected, but he was smiling. "Ranching isn't like those dime novels make it seem. It's mostly hard work and worry and hoping the weather doesn't kill everything you've invested in." Elena sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why haven't you married? A man with property like this, women must be lining up." Caleb laughed, but it sounded tired. "You'd think that, wouldn't you? But most of the respectable women in Sweetwater take one look at a cattle rancher and see nothing but rough hands and hard living. They want shopkeepers or lawyers or bankers, men who'll keep them comfortable in town." He shrugged. "And the women who don't mind ranch life are usually looking for someone to take care of them. I don't want someone to take care of. I want a partner." "Good luck finding that out here." "Yeah." Caleb met her eyes. "How are you really doing, Elena? The truth." The question caught her off guard. Most people asked how she was as a formality, not really wanting an honest answer. But Caleb looked like he actually cared about what she said. "I'm scared," Elena admitted. "I'm healing, Claire's healthy, and we're safe for now. But I keep thinking about what happens next. I can't stay here forever. But I don't have money or family or anywhere else to go. And even if I did..." She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "Even if I did, Silas is still out there, and men like him don't forget being crossed." "You think he'll come looking for you?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he's halfway to California by now and I'll never see him again." Elena wrapped her arms around herself. "But I can't stop thinking about what he'll do if he finds out I survived. If he finds out I told someone about the money." "You didn't tell anyone about the money." "I told you. And I'm not turning you into the law." Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Elena, I meant what I said. You're safe here. And if Silas Mercer is stupid enough to show up at Rowan Ridge, he'll find out what happens when you threaten people under my protection." There was something hard in his voice when he said it, a promise of violence that should have scared Elena, but instead made her feel safer than she had in years. "I need to start earning my keep," she said. "I can't just lie here eating your food and taking up space. There must be something I can do." "You're still healing." "I'm healing, not healed. There's a difference." Elena gestured toward the window. "You said Martha only comes a few days a week. Who does the cooking the rest of the time?" "The ranch hands take turns, usually ends up being beans and bacon." "I can cook. When I'm strong enough to stand at a stove, let me help with meals." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elena's expression must have told him it wasn't negotiable. "All right, when you're ready, but you push too hard and set your healing back, Martha will have both our heads." "Deal." They settled into an unexpected routine after that. Elena spent her mornings resting and caring for Clara, who was growing stronger every day, putting on weight, sleeping better, crying less. In the afternoons, when Clara napped, Elena would sit on the porch and watch the ranch at work. She saw Caleb directing his ranch hands, mending fences, checking on cattle. saw how the men respected him, how he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. By the end of the second week, Elena was strong enough to walk to the kitchen without help. The wound in her side had closed to an angry red scar, still tender but no longer bleeding. Martha had pronounced her stubborn as a Missouri mule and twice as lucky, which Elena took as a compliment. The first meal Elena cooked at Rowan Ridge was simple: beef stew with root vegetables, fresh bread, and dried apple pie. She worked slowly, taking breaks when the pain got too sharp, but the familiar rhythm of cooking soothed something in her that had been jangling and raw since the shooting. When Caleb came in for supper with his 3 ranch hands, Pete, a grizzled man in his 50s, Tom, barely 20 with a face full of freckles, and Diego, quiet and competent, they all stopped dead in the doorway at the sight of the table set with actual food. "Ma'am," Pete said, pulling off his hat, "you didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It wasn't trouble," Elena said. "And call me Elena." The meal was quiet at first, all 4 men eating like they'd never seen real cooking before. Then Tom spoke up. "This is the best thing I've eaten in 6 months, ma'am. I mean, Elena, ma'am." Elena hid her smile. "Thank you, Tom." After that, cooking became Elena's job. She threw herself into it with the same stubborn determination she'd applied to surviving, gradually building up her strength and stamina. She made hearty breakfasts before dawn, packed lunches for the men to take out on the range, prepared dinners that used every scrap of meat and vegetable the ranch produced. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she began to feel like she belonged at Rowan Ridge. Not as a guest or a burden, as part of its functioning, necessary existence. The problem was Sweetwater. Martha brought the gossip 3 weeks after Elena's arrival. "People in town are talking," she said bluntly, kneading bread dough in the ranch kitchen, while Elena sat nearby mending one of Caleb's shirts. Clara was asleep in her basket, and the afternoon sun slanted through the windows in golden bars. Elena's hand stilled on the fabric. "What are they saying?" "What do you think they're saying? Strange woman shows up, shot and pregnant. Clara's not pregnant. She's 3 months old." "Don't matter. Point is, you showed up out of nowhere, and now you're living at Rowan Ridge. People have opinions about that." "Let them have opinions. Doesn't affect me." Martha snorted. "Doesn't it? Because I heard Mrs. Patterson telling her husband that Caleb ought to be more careful about his reputation, taking in a woman of unknown character. And Mr. Harrison at the general store suggested maybe you and Caleb had something going before you showed up. That maybe Clara's his bastard, and this whole shooting story is just a cover." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd expected judgment. She'd lived with it her whole life. But hearing it laid out so plainly still hurt. "That's ridiculous," she said. "Caleb's never been anything but honorable." "I know that. You know that. But people in small towns love a scandal, and a beautiful mystery woman is more interesting than the truth." Martha gave the dough a particularly vicious punch, especially when the woman doesn't fit their idea of what beautiful should look like. Elena set down the mending. "They think Caleb couldn't possibly be helping me out of simple human decency. There must be some secret, some scandal, because why else would a man like him bother with a woman like me? Something like that." The old familiar shame crept up Elena's spine, the same feeling she'd carried since childhood, the constant awareness that her body was wrong, unacceptable, worthy of mockery or pity, but never just simple acceptance. "Should I leave?" she asked quietly. "And go where? You got money, family? Another ranch owner willing to take in a woman with a bullet scar and a baby?" Martha shaped the dough into loaves with efficient movements. "Don't be stupid, Elena. You leave now and you'll prove everyone right, that you were just some scheming woman using Caleb for his resources." "But if I stay?" "If you stay, you weather the gossip, same as everyone else who's ever tried to live a life in this territory. You think Caleb built this ranch without people talking? You think every successful person in Wyoming doesn't have a line of folks behind them whispering about how they don't deserve it?" Elena picked up the mending again, her stitches less neat than before. "Does Caleb know what they're saying? Of course he knows. Man's not stupid. But he hasn't said anything because he doesn't want you to feel bad about it." Martha slid the loaves into the oven. "That's Caleb. Takes the weight of the world on his shoulders and never complains." That evening, Elena watched Caleb come in from the range, exhausted and dusty, and wondered how much of that exhaustion came from her presence in his life. How much easier things would be if he'd just ridden past that night, left her to die like any sensible man would have done. But he hadn't, and now both of them had to live with the consequences. Fog. Summer deepened across Wyoming, and Elena grew stronger. Her wound healed into a puckered scar that pulled when she bent certain ways, but no longer bled or hurt. Claire grew fat and happy, rolling over and making sounds that might have been the beginning of words. The ranch prospered under summer sun, cattle fattening on good grass, horses sleek and well-fed, the hay harvest coming in strong. Elena established herself as indispensable. She didn't just cook. She managed the household accounts, organized the storage shed, preserved vegetables for winter, negotiated with suppliers who came through selling dry goods. She had a head for numbers and organization that Caleb admitted he'd been lacking, and slowly the ranch began running more efficiently. "You've got a mind for business," Caleb said one evening, reviewing the ledgers Elena had reorganized. "Where'd you learn this?" "My father was a storekeeper back in Missouri," Elena said. "I worked the counter from the time I was 8. Did all his bookkeeping by the time I was 12. "Why didn't you take over the store?" "Because I was fat and unmarried, and people didn't take me seriously." Elena said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "When Silas came through town talking sweet, my father practically threw me at him. Finally, someone willing to take his spinster daughter off his hands." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like an idiot." "He was practical. Women like me don't get many offers. You take what you can get." "That's not—" Caleb stopped, seemingly struggling for words. "Elena, you're one of the smartest, most capable people I've ever met. If your father couldn't see that, if Silas Mercer couldn't appreciate it, that's their failure, not yours." Elena looked up from the sewing in her lap, mending that never seemed to end, and found Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I mean it." He closed the ledger. "This ranch runs better with you here. I run better with you here." Something warm and dangerous curled in Elena's chest at those words. She pushed it down firmly. Caleb was being kind, that's all. Grateful for the help. She couldn't afford to mistake gratitude for anything more. But at night, lying alone in her bed with Clara sleeping beside her, Elena sometimes let herself imagine what it might be like if Caleb's regard was more than gratitude. If those long looks across the dinner table meant what her foolish heart wanted them to mean. Then she'd remember Silas's charm, how convincing he'd been, how thoroughly he'd used her, and the warmth would freeze into caution. She couldn't afford to be stupid twice. The confrontation came in August, on a day so hot the air shimmered like water. Elena was in the kitchen making bread when she heard raised voices outside. Through the window she saw Caleb talking to 2 men she didn't recognize, well-dressed, mounted on good horses, carrying themselves with the authority of people used to being obeyed. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Caleb's body language shift into something defensive. Saw one of the men gesture toward the house. Saw Caleb shake his head firmly. 5 minutes later, Caleb came inside looking like he'd been chewing nails. "Who were they?" Elena asked. "Harrison and Patterson, 2 of the bigger ranchers around Sweetwater." Caleb poured himself water from the pitcher, drank it in one long swallow. "They had some concerns they wanted to share." Elena's stomach tightened. "About me. About the situation at Rowan Ridge. Apparently the whole town's been talking about the mysterious woman living on my ranch. They wanted to know my intentions." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them it was none of their business." Caleb set down the cup hard enough to rattle. "I told them you're a widow." "I'm not a widow. As far as anyone needs to know, you are. Your husband died and left you destitute, and I'm helping you get back on your feet. That's the story." Elena turned back to her bread dough, kneading harder than necessary. "They don't believe that." "I don't care what they believe. But Elena—" Caleb moved closer, his voice softer. "They suggested it might be better for everyone if you moved on. Found work in town, maybe. Or went back east where you came from. They want me gone. They want to protect their precious social order. A woman living on a bachelor's ranch offends their sense of propriety." Elena laughed bitterly. "A fat woman living on a bachelor's ranch, you mean? I guarantee if I looked like their wives' pretty daughters, they'd be singing a different tune." "Elena—" "No, it's fine. I understand." She shaped the dough into loaves with sharp, angry movements. I've been here long enough, healed enough. You've done more than anyone could ask. I'll start looking for work in Sweetwater. You're not going anywhere. The words came out hard and definite, and Elena looked up in surprise. Caleb's face had that same stubborn set she'd seen the night he found her. The look of a man who'd made a decision and wouldn't be moved. "This is my ranch," he said. "Mine. And I'll have whoever I want living here, working here, staying here. Harrison and Patterson can take their concerns and—" He stopped, clearly editing what he'd been about to say. "You're not leaving, Elena. Not unless you want to. I'm ruining your reputation. I don't have a reputation worth worrying about. I'm a cattle rancher, not a damn debutante. You know what I mean." Elena gestured helplessly. "People are talking. They think I'm your mistress or some con artist, or let them think whatever they want. I know who you are. You know who you are. That's all that matters." "Is it?" Elena felt something break loose inside her, all the fear and shame and desperate hope she'd been holding back. Because out here, reputation is everything. You lose that. You lose business. You lose respect. And I'm not worth that, Caleb. I'm just some woman you found bleeding in the dirt. You don't owe me this. Maybe I don't owe you anything." Caleb crossed the distance between them, close enough that Elena could see the dust on his shirt, smell horse and leather and sun-warmed skin. "But maybe I want you here anyway. Did you consider that?" Elena's breath caught. "Why?" "Because this place was just a business before you got here. Now it's a home. Because I come in from working all day, and there's hot food and clean clothes and someone who actually gives a damn whether I'm tired or hurt or worried. Because Clara laughs when I make faces at her, and you've taught Pete to play checkers, and Diego actually smiles now, and everything just works better with you here." He stopped, seeming to realize he'd said more than he meant to. "And because," he continued more quietly, "I like who I am when you're around. I like the man I see reflected in your eyes. That sounds selfish?" "Yes," Elena whispered. Then, "No, I don't know." They stood there in the kitchen, flour dust hanging in the golden afternoon light, and Elena felt the careful walls she'd built around her heart starting to crack. "I can't promise you it'll be easy," Caleb said. "People will keep talking. Harrison and Patterson aren't the only ones with opinions, but if you can weather that, if you want to weather it, then I'd like you to stay." "For how long?" "As long as you want." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Elena thought about Missouri and her father's store and all the years of being told she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection came her way. Thought about Silas and his charm and how thoroughly he'd betrayed her. Thought about dying on the prairie with Clara in her arms, certain no one would care enough to even bury them properly. And then she thought about Caleb finding her in the dark, Caleb cleaning her wounds and never flinching at her body, Caleb standing up to his neighbors and telling them to mind their own business, Caleb offering her a home without asking her to be anyone but exactly who she was. "I'll stay," she said. Caleb's face transformed with relief. "Yeah? On one condition." "Name it." "Stop thinking you're doing me some kind of favor. I work here. I earn my place. We're partners, not charity case and savior." Elena held out her flour-dusted hand. "Partners." Caleb took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "Partners." They shook on it formal-like, as if they were sealing a business deal instead of something that felt much more dangerous and precious. Outside, the sun beat down on Rowan Ridge, and the cattle grazed, and somewhere far away, Silas Mercer was still alive and dangerous. But for the first time since she'd been shot, Elena felt something other than fear or shame or desperate survival. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd found a place where she could stay. The handshake should have settled things, but peace never came easy in Wyoming. September arrived with cooler nights and the first hint of gold touching the cottonwood leaves. Elena had been at Rowan Ridge for nearly 3 months, and the rhythm of ranch life had sunk into her bones like the ache of old injuries. Familiar, constant, almost comfortable. Almost. Because even though Caleb had told Harrison and Patterson to mind their business, the whispers from Sweetwater didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. Martha brought fresh gossip with every visit, her face growing grimmer each time. Mrs. Patterson had made pointed comments at church about women who lacked proper shame. Mr. Harrison had suggested to anyone who'd listen that Caleb Rowan was being taken advantage of by a scheming opportunist. And according to Martha, at least 3 different stories were circulating about who Elena really was. Everything from a prostitute hiding from the law to a con artist working some long game. "They're calling you all kinds of names I won't repeat," Martha said, chopping onions with unnecessary force. "And some of them are getting bolder about it. Mrs. Chen asked me point blank if you were Caleb's kept woman." Elena's hands tightened on the butter churn. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that if she wanted to keep making money off my dress orders, she'd better learn to keep her mouth shut about things that don't concern her." Martha swept the onions into a pot. "But Elena, it's getting bad. People are starting to take sides." "Sides?" "For or against Caleb keeping you here. The Harrisons and Pattersons are leading the charge, saying it's improper. But there's others, mostly the folks who've actually met you at market or seen how you've helped organize the church charity drive, who think the gossips need to find better entertainment." Elena had been into Sweetwater exactly 4 times since arriving at Rowan Ridge. Each trip had been an exercise in humiliation she was getting far too used to. Women would stop talking when she passed. Men would stare with either contempt or the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. The shopkeepers were polite to her face, Caleb Rowan's money spent as well as anyone's, but she'd heard the whispers trailing behind her like smoke. Fat, shameless, opportunist, whore. The word shouldn't have hurt. Elena had heard worse growing up, but somehow, after months of being treated with basic human dignity at Rowan Ridge, going back into that cesspool of judgment felt worse than ever. "Maybe I should stop going into town," Elena said, "and let them win? Let them drive you into hiding?" Martha shook her head firmly. "No. You hold your head up and you keep living your life. The truth has a way of coming out eventually." But what was the truth? That Elena was a woman running from an outlaw husband who tried to murder her? That she was living on a bachelor's ranch because she had nowhere else to go? That she was starting to have feelings for Caleb Rowan that terrified her more than anything Silas had ever done? None of those truths seemed likely to quiet the gossips. That evening, Elena brought up the problem with Caleb while they sat on the porch after supper. Clara was asleep in her basket, and the ranch hands had gone back to the bunkhouse. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Elena had any capacity left for noticing beauty. "Martha says it's getting worse in town," she said. Caleb, who'd been watching his cattle graze in the distance, turned to look at her. "I know." "You know?" "Pete heard some things at the saloon last week. Tom got into an argument at the general store. People have opinions." He said it like it didn't bother him, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. "This is affecting your business." "Not really. Cattle don't care about gossip." "But your business partners do. Your neighbors do. The banks you need to work with do." Elena wrapped her shawl tighter against the cooling air. "Caleb, I'm making things harder for you. Maybe if I found work in town, got my own place." "With what money? And living where?" "There's exactly 1 boarding house in Sweetwater, and Mrs. Patterson runs it. You think she's going to rent you a room?" Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on solving the problem of her presence that she hadn't considered the practical impossibilities of leaving. "I could work," she said. "There must be someone who needs help. I could clean houses or take in laundry or... You really want to scrub floors for the same women who are calling you names behind your back? What else am I supposed to do?" Elena's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Stay here and keep damaging your reputation until no one in the territory will do business with you? My reputation can handle it." "Can it? Or are you just being stubborn?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You remember what I told you about my mother? That she was a big woman, that people judged her. That's part of it. But what I didn't tell you is what happened after she died." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My father remarried within 6 months, brought home a woman half his age, skinny as a rail, pretty and exactly the way my mother wasn't. Everyone in our town said he'd finally gotten himself a proper wife, like my mother had just been practice." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. "I was 12 years old," Caleb continued, "and I hated that woman. Not because she was there. I probably would have hated anyone who tried to replace my mother, but because of what her presence meant. That my father had always been ashamed. That all those years of pretending to love my mother, he'd been wishing for something different. Caleb, I left home at 14, worked railroad crews, cattle drives, whatever would pay. Built this ranch from nothing because I swore I'd never live in a place where people's opinions mattered more than the truth. He finally looked at her. So no, Elena, I'm not being stubborn. I'm being consistent. I don't give a damn what Sweetwater thinks about who I choose to have on my property. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they just made Elena feel worse. But you should care, she said quietly. Because out here, reputation and business are the same thing, and I'm not worth losing everything you've built. Why do you keep saying that? Why do you keep acting like you're worthless? Because I've spent my entire life being told I am. The words burst out before Elena could stop them. Because every person I've ever trusted has confirmed it. My father, who couldn't wait to marry me off. Silas, who used me and then shot me when I became inconvenient. Even the women in town, they look at me and see nothing but a burden someone's too kind to get rid of. I don't see that. Then what do you see? Caleb stood, moved to the porch railing, his back to her. I see someone who survived being shot and walked 40 miles through hostile territory to save her child. I see someone who's transformed this ranch from a place I slept into a home worth coming back to. I see someone who's smart and capable and doesn't back down from work, no matter how hard it gets. He turned around. I see someone I'd be lucky to have as a partner. That's what I see. Elena's throat tightened. You barely know me. I've been watching you for 3 months. I know you get up before dawn, even though you don't have to. I know you sing to Clara when you think no one's listening. I know you reorganized my entire account system and saved me probably $300 in duplicate orders. I know you're kind to the ranch hands even when they're idiots. And I know you're scared of something more than Silas Mercer, though I can't quite figure out what. I'm scared of trusting the wrong person again, Elena said. I'm scared of mistaking kindness for something it isn't. I'm scared that one day you'll wake up and realize I'm exactly what everyone says I am, just some fat woman who trapped you with gratitude and guilt. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. Then Caleb crossed the porch and knelt in front of her chair so they were eye to eye. Listen to me. You are not fat. You're built solid and strong, and there's not a damn thing wrong with that. You didn't trap me into anything. I made my choices with open eyes. And if kindness is all this is, then I'm fine with that too. But Elena... He stopped, and for the first time since she'd known him, Caleb looked uncertain. But what? Elena whispered. But I don't think it is just kindness. Not anymore. The words hung in the cooling evening air between them. Elena knew she should say something, ask what he meant, clarify the boundaries, protect herself from the inevitable disappointment. But she couldn't make her voice work, couldn't make herself break the moment that felt fragile as spun glass. Clara chose that moment to wake with a wail that shattered the quiet like a gunshot. Caleb stood quickly, stepping back. I've got an early morning. Right, yes. He left without looking back, and Elena was alone on the porch with her crying daughter and a heart that felt like it was trying to tear itself in half. The next few weeks were awkward in ways that made Elena want to crawl out of her own skin. She and Caleb were carefully polite to each other, never quite meeting eyes, always finding reasons to be in different parts of the ranch. The easy companionship they'd built over the summer had fractured into something uncertain and painful. The ranch hands noticed, but had the good sense to stay quiet about it. Martha noticed and did not have the good sense to stay quiet. You two are dancing around each other like spooked horses, she said one afternoon, kneading bread while Elena pretended to focus on mending. Just talk to him. There's nothing to talk about. There's clearly something to talk about. The man looks like he hasn't slept in a week, and you're jumping every time he walks in a room. We said some things that complicated the situation. Martha snorted. Complicated. That's one word for it. She shaped the dough with practiced hands. Let me ask you something. Do you have feelings for Caleb, Rowan? Elena's needle slipped, stabbing her finger. She swore under her breath and stuck the finger in her mouth. I'll take that as a yes, Martha said dryly. It doesn't matter what I feel. I can't. I won't. I'm not going to put him in a position where he feels obligated to. Elena stopped, frustrated by her inability to articulate the tangle of fear and hope in her chest. To what? Care about you? Little late for that. To marry me out of some misguided sense of honor, Or worse, to keep me here out of pity while everyone in the territory talks about what a fool he is. So you'd rather leave and let him wonder if he did something wrong. Let him think you didn't care. I'd rather leave before I care too much to go. Martha was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the dough. My husband died 7 years ago, she finally said. Thrown from a horse, broke his neck. We'd been married 23 years. And you know what I regret most? Elena shook her head. All the times I didn't tell him I loved him because I thought he already knew. All the moments I let slip past because I figured we had time. Martha resumed kneading. You don't get time, Elena. Not out here. Not in this life. You get moments, and you either take them or you don't. That's different. You were already married. You'd already made your choice. And what do you think marriage is except choosing someone over and over? Every day? Every argument? Every hard season? You choose or you don't. She shaped the dough into loaves. Caleb's choosing you. Question is whether you're brave enough to choose him back. Elena didn't have an answer to that. October brought the first real cold snap, frost on the grass in the mornings and ice forming on the water troughs. The cattle were moved to lower pastures, and Caleb spent long days preparing the ranch for winter, repairing buildings, stocking supplies, making sure everything was secure before the snows came. Elena threw herself into preservation work, canning vegetables, smoking meat, storing root crops in the cellar. It was hard physical labor that left her exhausted at the end of each day, which was exactly what she wanted. Too tired to think, too busy to dwell on the thing between her and Caleb that neither of them would name. Clara turned 6 months old and started sitting up on her own, grinning, toothless smiles that made Elena's heart hurt. Her daughter was thriving, healthy and happy and safe. That should have been enough. That should have been everything. But lying alone in her bed at night, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the look on Caleb's face that evening on the porch. The way he'd said it's not just kindness, like he was confessing something dangerous. The way she'd wanted to lean forward and kiss him and had been too scared to move. The gossip from town continued, though it shifted in strange ways. According to Martha, some people were now saying that Elena must have some kind of hold over Caleb, that she'd bewitched him or was blackmailing him or had some secret that kept him bound to her. They can't accept that he might just like you, Martha said, her voice dripping with disgust. Has to be magic or manipulation, because heaven forbid a man chooses a woman for who she is instead of what she looks like. Does Caleb know what they're saying? Of course he knows. He goes into town every week for supplies. He hears things. And he ignores them, same as always. Martha gave Elena a significant look. Man's got more patience than sense sometimes. The breaking point came in late October when Pete came back from Sweetwater with news that made Caleb's face go hard as stone. Silas Mercer's been spotted, Pete said, standing in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands. Harrison saw a wanted poster at the sheriff's office. He's wanted for 3 bank robberies now, one as far south as Colorado. Last confirmed sighting was 2 weeks ago near Rawlins. Elena's blood went cold. Rawlins was maybe 100 miles from Sweetwater. How sure are they? Caleb asked. Sure enough that there's a $500 bounty on his head, dead or alive. After Pete left, Elena stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the ranch without really seeing it. Her hands were shaking. He's coming here, she said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He knows I survived. He'd have heard by now that a woman with a baby showed up at your ranch. And he knows I'm the only one who can connect him to that first robbery. Elena turned to face Caleb. He'll come to make sure I can't talk. Let him come. I've got 3 armed ranch hands and enough rifles to hold off a small army. You don't understand what kind of man he is. Silas doesn't just kill you, he destroys you first. He'll burn the ranch, kill the cattle, hurt everyone you care about, and then he'll kill you. Her voice cracked. And it'll be my fault. All of this, everything you've built, he'll take it because I brought him here. Elena, I have to leave, tonight. Take Clara and go somewhere he can't find us. Maybe back east or north to Montana. Somewhere far enough that he won't bother tracking. No. The word was flat and absolute. Caleb, you're not listening. No, you're not listening. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and gripped her shoulders. You're not running. Not from him. Not from this. Not from me. I meant what I said, Elena. You're safe here. And if Silas Mercer is stupid enough to show up at Rowan Ridge, He'll find out what happens when you threaten people under my protection. He'd stopped himself before saying something. My what? My employee? My friend? My... Elena didn't let herself finish the thought. I can't let you risk everything for me, she said. Too late. Already risked it. Caleb's hands were still on her shoulders, warm and solid. Besides, you think I'm going to let that bastard hurt you again after what he did? I'd rather face him head on than spend the rest of my life wondering if you're safe. Why? Elena whispered. Why do you care this much? Caleb looked at her for a long moment, his face showing the same struggle she felt every time she was near him. The wanting and the fear and the certainty that wanting anything was the fastest way to lose it. Because you matter to me, he finally said. Because somewhere between pulling you onto my horse and watching you take over my kitchen, you became the most important person in my life. And I'll be damned if I'm going to lose you to some outlaw with a grudge. Elena's breath caught. Caleb, I'm not asking you for anything, he said quickly. I'm not trying to obligate you or trap you or make you feel like you owe me. I just need you to know, if there's a fight coming, I'm not backing down, and I'm not letting you face it alone. They stood there at the kitchen, close enough that Elena could feel the heat coming off his body, could see the pulse jumping in his throat. She thought about all the reasons she should step back, all the ways this could go wrong, all the lessons she'd learned about trusting men who said pretty things. Then she thought about the last 4 months, about Caleb cleaning her wounds without flinching, about him standing up to his neighbors, about him treating her like she had value even when she couldn't see it herself. I matter to you, she said slowly, testing the words. Yes. More than just someone you helped. A lot more. Elena took a breath. You matter to me too, and that terrifies me. Yeah. Caleb's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. Me too. So what do we do about it? I don't know. Figure it out as we go? He smiled slightly. I'm not much good at this part. Haven't had a lot of practice. That makes 2 of us. Elena let herself lean into him just slightly and felt his arms come around her. It was the first time they'd touched beyond accidental brushes or helping hands, and it felt both foreign and achingly right. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the fading afternoon light. Then Clara woke up screaming, and they broke apart with awkward laughs. She's got timing, Caleb said. Always does. Elena went to pick up her daughter, feeling lighter than she had in weeks despite the threat of Silas hanging over them. Whatever was happening between her and Caleb, whatever they were becoming to each other, it was real. Fragile and uncertain, but real. And for now, that was enough. The next few days passed in tense preparation. Caleb brought in extra ammunition and cleaned every rifle on the ranch. The ranch hands were told to stay alert, to report anything unusual. Pete rode out to check the boundaries of the property twice a day. Even Martha, who'd seen her share of frontier violence, started carrying a pistol in her apron pocket. Just in case, she said grimly. Elena tried to continue with her normal routine, cooking, cleaning, caring for Clara. But fear sat in her stomach like a stone. She kept seeing Silas's face the moment before he shot her, kept remembering the cold way he'd looked at his own daughter and walked away. He was coming. She knew it the way animals know when storms are brewing. Caleb must have sensed her anxiety because he started making excuses to check on her throughout the day, just stopping by the kitchen to see if she needed anything, finding reasons to be in the house when he should have been out on the range. You don't have to watch over me, Elena said one afternoon when he appeared for the 3rd time since lunch. I'm not watching over you. I'm checking the... He stopped, caught. All right, yes. I'm watching over you. I'm not going to break. I know you're not. You're one of the strongest people I know. He leaned against the kitchen counter. But you're also scared, and I don't blame you. So let me check on you, all right? Makes me feel useful. Elena almost smiled. Fine, but you're disrupting my work. What work? I'm making pie. Well, in that case, I should definitely stay and supervise. Supervise? Make sure you're doing it right. I've made about 100 pies since I got here. When have I ever done it wrong? There's always a first time. Caleb grinned, and for a moment the tension lifted. They fell into an easy rhythm, Elena working on the pie, Caleb sitting at the table pretending to review accounts, but mostly just watching her. Clara played on a blanket nearby, making sounds that were almost words, but not quite. What was she like? Elena asked. Your mother. Caleb looked up from the ledger he wasn't really reading. Loud. She had this laugh that you could hear across 3 counties, and she didn't take any nonsense from anyone, not my father, not the neighbors, not the whole town put together. She sounds wonderful. She was. Stubborn as hell, but wonderful. He smiled at the memory. She used to make these apple fritters that were so good, my father would hide them from me and my brothers. We'd find them eventually. She always left clues like she wanted us to figure out where she'd hidden them. How many brothers do you have? Had 2. Caleb's smile faded. Daniel died in the war. Marcus took sick a few years back and didn't recover. It's just me now. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But his voice said it still hurt. They were quiet for a while, comfortable silence broken only by the sound of Elena rolling out pie crust and Clara babbling to herself. What about you? Caleb finally asked. Any siblings? A sister. Younger. Margaret. Elena crimped the edges of the crust with more force than necessary. She was the pretty one. Delicate. Everything I wasn't. Last I heard, she married a banker in St. Louis. You miss her? I miss who I thought she was. But we weren't ever really close. Elena stopped, measuring her words. She used to tell people I ate her portions at dinner. That's why she was so thin and I was so heavy. It wasn't true, but people believed it because it fit what they already thought. That's cruel. That's family. Elena slid the pie into the oven. Sometimes the people who should love you most are the first ones to tear you down. Caleb stood, moved closer. Elena. A gunshot cracked across the ranch, sharp and sudden. They both froze. Then Caleb was moving, grabbing the rifle from above the door. Stay inside. Lock the doors. Caleb, stay inside. He was gone before Elena could argue, running toward the sound of shouting from the direction of the bunkhouse. Elena scooped up Clara and rushed to the window, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through the glass, she saw Pete and Tom running from the barn, rifles in hand, saw Diego mounted and riding hard toward the north boundary, saw Caleb coordinating them with sharp gestures, his face set in grim lines. But she didn't see Silas. Didn't see anyone who shouldn't be there. 5 minutes stretched into 10. 10 into 20. Elena paced the kitchen with Clara clutching at her dress, every nerve screaming. Finally, the door opened and Caleb came back in. He looked tired but unhurt. What happened? Elena demanded. Coyote got into the chicken coop. Pete shot at it and missed, so it ran. False alarm. He set the rifle down. Sorry. I should have come back sooner to tell you it was nothing. A coyote. Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. Just a coyote. Just a coyote. Caleb crossed to her, put his hands on her arms. Hey, you're shaking. When I heard the shot, I know. I'm sorry. He pulled her close, Clara squished between them. But it wasn't him. It was just a damn coyote after our chickens. Elena let herself lean into him, breathing hard. The fear was still there, coiled tight in her chest, but Caleb's solid presence helped ground her. He's coming, she whispered. I know he is. Maybe. But when he does, we'll be ready. Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head, casual, automatic, like he'd been doing it for years. Then he seemed to realize what he'd done and pulled back slightly. Sorry, it's fine. Elena looked up at him. It's more than fine. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Caleb leaned down and kissed her properly, carefully, like he was afraid she might break or disappear. Elena kissed him back, one hand still holding Clara, the other gripping his shirt like an anchor. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Caleb admitted. So have I, but Caleb? Elena stepped back, needing the distance to think clearly. I can't, not with everything that's happening. Not with Silas out there and the whole town talking, and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just needed you to know. He touched her face gently. I care about you, Elena, and whatever happens with Silas or Sweetwater or anything else, that's not going to change. You might change your mind. I won't. You don't know that. You barely know me. I know enough. He smiled slightly. And I'd like to know more, if you'll let me. Elena wanted to say yes, wanted to lean into the promise of something real and lasting. But fear held her back. Fear of being hurt again, fear of trusting the wrong man, fear that she was reading too much into kindness. Can we just take it slow, she finally said. I need time to trust this, to trust that it's real. As slow as you need. Caleb stepped back, giving her space. I'm not going anywhere, Elena. However long it takes. 2 weeks later, Silas Mercer rode into Sweetwater. He didn't come quietly or carefully. He rode straight down the main street at noon, his horse lathered and his face showing weeks of hard traveling. He stopped at the saloon, ordered whiskey, and started asking questions about a woman with a baby who'd shown up the previous summer. By the time Pete heard about it, he'd been in town picking up supplies. Silas had already learned where Elena was staying. Pete rode back to Rowan Ridge like his life depended on it and burst into the kitchen where Elena was making lunch. He's in Sweetwater, Pete gasped, winded. Asking about you, knows you're here. Elena's vision tunneled. When? Now. He could be riding this way any minute. Caleb appeared from the barn, must have seen Pete's horse. What's wrong? Silas Mercer's in town, Elena said, her voice surprisingly steady. He knows where I am. Caleb's face went hard. Get inside, all of you. Pete, get Tom and Diego. I want every rifle loaded and every man at a window. They move fast, years of frontier living making them efficient in crisis. Within minutes, the ranch house was locked down tight. Elena was in the back bedroom with Clara, a pistol Caleb had given her sitting heavy on the dresser. Through the window, she could see the ranch hands positioned at various points around the property, rifles ready. They waited. The sun crawled across the sky. Clara fussed and Elena fed her with shaking hands, trying to keep calm for her daughter's sake. Every sound made her jump, a horse neighing, the wind rattling the shutters, a bird landing on the roof. Sunset approached with no sign of Silas. Maybe he wasn't coming. Maybe he'd gotten drunk in Sweetwater and passed out. Maybe he'd decided Elena wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe. Then just as the light was fading to twilight, Tom called out, Rider approaching, single man, armed. Elena's heart stopped. She heard Caleb's voice, calm and commanding. Let him get close. I want to talk before anyone starts shooting. Through her window, Elena watched a horse and rider materialize out of the dusk. Even from a distance, even after months apart, she recognized Silas's silhouette, the way he sat his horse too casually, like he owned the world. He stopped maybe 50 yards from the house, well out of easy rifle range, but close enough to be heard. Elena, he called out, I know you're in there. Come on out and let's talk. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. She's not interested in talking to you, Mercer. Who the hell are you? Caleb Rowan. This is my land, and you're trespassing. Silas laughed. That's so. Well, Rowan, seems to me you're harboring my wife. I've come to collect what's mine. Your wife, who you shot and left to die? That wife? Had a misunderstanding is all. These things happen in marriage. These things don't happen. You tried to murder her. That's her story. Mine's different. Silas leaned forward in his saddle. Now, you seem like a reasonable man, rich too from the look of this place. So here's what I'm thinking. I'll take Elena and the baby off your hands, and we'll call it even. No trouble, no law involved, clean break. No. The single word rang out clear and firm. No? Silas's voice hardened. Friend, I don't think you understand the situation here. I understand it fine. You're a wanted outlaw with a $500 bounty on your head. You're on my property threatening people under my protection, and you've got about 10 seconds to turn that horse around before I shoot you off it. Silence stretched taut. Then Silas said, You're sweet on her. That's what this is. Got yourself a fat little bed warmer, and now you don't want to give her back. Elena flinched at the words, but Caleb didn't react. I'm done talking, Mercer. Ride away now, or I'll put you down where you sit. Big words from a man who's outnumbered. Outnumbered? I've got 4 rifles trained on you right now. You've got 1 pistol and a death wish. For the first time, Silas seemed uncertain. His hand moved toward his gun. Don't, Caleb warned. She's my wife. I have a legal right. You gave up any rights when you pulled that trigger. Last chance. Right away or die here. Your choice. The moment stretched out forever, balanced on a knife's edge. Then Silas slowly turned his horse around. This isn't over, Rowan. You think you can just take what's mine, and she was never yours. Not really. You just never bothered to notice. Silas looked back at the house, his eyes finding the window where Elena stood. Even from a distance, she could see the rage on his face. I'll be back, he said, with the law, with proof of marriage, with whatever it takes. And when I come back, you'll hand her over, or I'll burn this whole place to ash. Then he rode into the gathering darkness, disappearing like a bad dream. But Elena knew better than to think he was gone for good. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. Silas's threat hung over Rowan Ridge like smoke that wouldn't clear. That night, nobody slept. Caleb posted watches and shifts, Pete taking first, Tom second, Diego third, while Caleb himself prowled the property like a caged animal. Elena sat in the kitchen with Clara sleeping in her basket, the pistol within arm's reach, and listened to the house settle and creak around her. Every sound could be Silas returning. Every shadow could be death coming back to finish what it started. When dawn finally broke gray and cold across the prairie, Elena felt hollowed out. She made coffee with shaking hands and started breakfast on autopilot, cooking for men who needed fuel more than they needed comfort. Caleb came in as she was frying bacon, his face showing the weight of a sleepless night. He poured himself coffee and stood at the window, watching the sunrise like it might contain answers.
He'll go to the law, Elena said quietly. Like he threatened. He'll claim I'm his wife and you're keeping me here against my will. Let him. He's wanted in 3 territories. The second he shows his face at a sheriff's office, they'll arrest him.
You don't know that. He's charming when he wants to be, convincing. And he has proof. We were married by a traveling preacher in Missouri. There's a certificate somewhere. Elena flipped the bacon with more force than necessary. If he can make himself look like the wronged husband, if he can paint me as the runaway wife who stole his child, no one's going to believe that. Won't they? Elena turned to face him. I'm living on your ranch, unmarried, taking care of your house, sharing your meals. How do you think that looks to a judge, to a jury? Caleb set down his coffee cup hard enough to rattle. You're here because you had nowhere else to go. Because I offered you protection. That's not a crime. Maybe not. But it's enough to create doubt. Enough to make people wonder if maybe Silas has a point. Elena felt the familiar weight of judgment settling back over her shoulders. I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much, too big, too improper. You think a courtroom's going to be different? They'll look at me and decide I'm exactly what Silas says I am. Then we don't let it get to a courtroom. How? I don't know yet, but Elena... Caleb crossed to her, took her hands. I'm not letting him take you. I don't care what kind of paper he has or what lies he tells. You're staying here. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that determination and righteousness would be enough to keep them safe. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. What if staying here just makes it worse? She asked. What if my being here is what destroys everything you've built? Then it destroys. I'll build again. He squeezed her hands. But I'm not trading your safety for property or reputation or anything else. You understand? Before Elena could answer, Pete burst through the door with news that made her blood turn to ice. Sheriff's in Sweetwater, Pete said, breathing hard. Came in on the morning stage. Word is someone filed a complaint about kidnapping. Caleb's face went dark. How fast? Martha sent her boy riding out ahead of the news. Sheriff's probably an hour behind, maybe 2. All right. Caleb released Elena's hands and started moving with purpose. Tom, Diego, get ready to ride. We're going into town to meet this head on. Pete, you stay here with Elena and Clara. No, Elena said. Everyone turned to look at her. No, she repeated, stronger now. I'm not hiding here while you fight my battles. If the sheriff wants to hear Silas's lies, he's going to hear my truth too. Elena, that's not what? Not safe? Nothing about this is safe. But I'm done being the helpless woman who needs protecting. She pulled off her apron and hung it on the hook. I'm going with you. With the baby? Martha can watch Clara. She's done it before. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Elena's expression must have told him it wouldn't work. Fine. But you stay close to me. And if things go bad, I'll deal with it. I've dealt with worse." They rode into Sweetwater an hour later. Caleb, Elena, Tom, and Diego. The morning was cold enough that Elena could see her breath, and the wind cut through her coat like it wasn't there. She rode behind Caleb on his horse, same as that first night, except now she wasn't bleeding and half dead. Now she was riding toward confrontation with her eyes open. The town looked different in daylight, more real and somehow more hostile. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. Women whispered behind their hands. Men stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright contempt. Elena kept her chin up and her eyes forward. They found the sheriff outside the hotel, a thick-built man in his 50s with a badge pinned to his vest and the weary look of someone who'd seen too much frontier justice. He was talking to Silas, who had cleaned up since the previous night and was playing the part of concerned husband with practiced ease. "That's her," Silas said when he spotted Elena. "That's my wife, Elena Mercer." The sheriff turned to study Elena with neutral eyes. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Donnelly. Your husband here says you ran off with his daughter, and he's been looking for you for months." "He's lying," Elena said before Caleb could speak. "He shot me and left me to die in the prairie. I didn't run. I survived." "She's confused," Silas said smoothly. "We had an argument, that's true. Things got heated, but I never shot her. I left to cool down, and when I came back, she was gone. Took our baby and disappeared." "That's not what happened." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," the sheriff said. "I am calm, and I'm telling you he's a liar and an outlaw. There are wanted posters for him in 3 territories. Old business. Mistakes I'm not proud of." Silas looked at the sheriff with just the right amount of regret. "I was wild when I was younger. Made bad choices, but I've changed. Found the law, found my faith, started trying to live right. Then my wife runs off, and I've been searching ever since." Elena felt sick listening to him. This was the Silas who'd courted her back in Missouri. Charming, repentant, saying exactly what people wanted to hear. And it was working. She could see it in the sheriff's face, the way his expression was softening toward Silas and hardening toward her. "Sheriff," Caleb said, "this man shot Elena and left her for dead. I found her bleeding on my property with a 3-month-old baby. She had a gunshot wound that nearly killed her." "She's got a scar," Silas said quickly. "But that don't prove I shot her. Could have been anyone. Could have been an accident. Could have been self-inflicted for all we know." "Self-inflicted?" Elena's voice cracked. "You think I shot myself in the side and then walked 40 miles through hostile territory?" "I think you're a troubled woman who ran from her marriage and is now making up stories to justify it." Silas looked at her with something that might have passed for pity if you didn't know him. "Elena, honey, I know you've struggled. With your weight, with people's judgment, with feeling like you never fit anywhere. I know I wasn't always patient with that, but I'm here now. I want to make things right. Come home with me and we can work this out." The manipulation was masterful. In a few sentences, he'd painted her as unstable, oversensitive about her appearance, and prone to running away from problems. He'd made himself the long-suffering husband trying to help his difficult wife, and people were buying it. Elena could see townsfolk gathering to watch, could hear the whispers starting, could see Mrs. Patterson nodding like Silas had just confirmed everything she'd suspected. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Elena said. "And Clara's not your daughter to claim. You gave up any right to her when you put a bullet in me. Clara's my blood, my legal daughter, and Elena's my legal wife." Silas pulled papers from his coat. "I've got the marriage certificate right here. Sheriff, according to territorial law, I have the right to take my wife and child home." Sheriff Donnelly took the papers, examined them. "These look legitimate." "They are. We were married legally in Missouri, September of '75. Silas looked at Elena. "You can't deny that." She couldn't. The marriage was legal, performed by a traveling preacher who'd been drunk but ordained. Elena had been so grateful for the proposal, so desperate to escape her father's house, that she hadn't questioned anything. "Marriage doesn't give you the right to shoot your wife," Caleb said. "I didn't shoot her. And even if I had, which I'm not admitting, that's a matter between husband and wife, not something for outsiders to interfere with." Silas's voice hardened slightly. "Mr. Rowan, I appreciate you giving Elena shelter, but she's my wife and that baby's my daughter. Time for them to come home. No, Caleb said flatly. I'm not asking permission. And I'm not giving consent. Elena stays at Rowan Ridge. That's not your decision to make. The two men stared at each other, and Elena could feel violence gathering in the air like static before lightning. Sheriff Donnelly cleared his throat. Mr. Rowan, I understand you've been helping Mrs. Mercer. That's commendable. But the law is clear on this. She's legally married to Mr. Mercer here, and unless there's proof of wrongdoing that rises to criminal charges, he has the right to take his family home. There is proof. Elena's scar could be from anything, like Mr. Mercer said. Without witnesses or a formal complaint filed at the time, it's just her word against his. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but firm. Mrs. Mercer, I'm going to have to ask you to go with your husband. No. Ma'am, No? Elena stepped forward, her heart hammering but her voice steady. Sheriff, I understand the law says I'm his property, that marriage gives him rights over me and my daughter. But I'm telling you as clearly as I can that if you force me to go with him, you're signing my death warrant. He will kill me. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually he'll finish what he started. That's dramatic talk, ma'am. It's the truth. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself why a man who supposedly loves his wife would leave her bleeding in the dirt with a baby and no supplies. Ask yourself why he didn't search for me for 4 months. Ask yourself why his first response to seeing me alive was to threaten to burn down the ranch protecting me. She's making things up, Silas said, but something flickered in his eyes. Am I? You stood on Caleb's property last night and threatened arson. Tom, Diego, Pete, they all heard you. Caleb heard you. Are we all lying? The crowd that had gathered was murmuring now, people exchanging looks. The story was getting complicated in ways that made Silas's simple narrative harder to believe. Sheriff Donnelly looked between them, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Mr. Mercer, did you threaten Mr. Rowan's property?
I was upset. Man's keeping my wife from me. What husband wouldn't be angry? That's not a denial. Fine. Maybe I said some things I shouldn't have, but I didn't mean... He meant it, Caleb interrupted. And he's wanted for 3 bank robberies. Check your posters, Sheriff, unless those mysteriously disappeared since yesterday. The sheriff's face changed. You're wanted? Old charges, I told you. How old? Silas hesitated just long enough to condemn himself. A few years.
The last robbery was 6 weeks ago in Colorado, Elena said. $20,000 from a bank in Denver. I know because I found the money hidden in our wagon. That's why he shot me. Because I discovered what he'd done and he needed me silent. That's a lie. Check the dates, Sheriff. Check when the Denver robbery happened and when I showed up at Rowan Ridge. They'll match. Elena felt strength flowing back into her spine, the same stubborn determination that had kept her walking across the prairie. And while you're checking, ask yourself if a man innocent of robbery would be hiding in Wyoming instead of going to the authorities to clear his name. Sheriff Donnelly's hand moved to rest on his gun. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. You can explain that at my office. Nice and calm. The sheriff's voice had taken on the tone of a man who'd made a decision. Mrs. Mercer, you're free to go. If you choose to stay at Mr. Rowan's ranch, that's your business. The law might say you're married, but I'm not in the habit of forcing women to go with men who threaten to burn down their neighbor's property. Sheriff, you can't... Silas started. I can and I am. Now move, before I add resisting to whatever else I find when I start digging into those robbery charges. Silas looked at Elena with such hatred that she took an involuntary step back. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over. Yeah, it is, Caleb said quietly. Walk away while you still can. For a moment, Elena thought Silas might draw his gun. Thought the whole situation might explode into violence right there in the middle of Sweetwater's main street. Then Silas turned and walked toward the sheriff's office, his shoulders rigid with fury. Sheriff Donnelly followed, then paused to look back at Elena. Ma'am, I'll need you to come by tomorrow and make a formal statement about the shooting and the robbery both. Bring any evidence you've got. I don't have evidence. He took everything when he left. Your testimony's evidence, and that scar's evidence. Between that and the wanted posters, I should have enough to hold him for trial. The sheriff tipped his hat. You did good. Speaking up takes courage. After he left, Elena stood in the middle of the street feeling like she might collapse. Her legs were shaking and her hands were numb, and she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Caleb touched her arm gently. Elena, you all right?
I don't know. Maybe. I think so. She looked up at him. Did that really just happen? Did the sheriff really take Silas? He really did. But he said Silas was wanted, that they'd check the charges, and they will. And when they do, they'll find out everything you said was true. Caleb's hand moved to her back, steadying. Come on, let's get you home.
But before they could move, Martha appeared from the crowd and pulled Elena into a fierce hug. Well done. I knew you had steel in you. I was terrified. Being brave and being terrified aren't opposites. They're the same thing. Martha stepped back, looked at the crowd that was still watching. And the rest of you can go about your business. Show's over. People began to disperse slowly, still whispering, but the tone had shifted. Elena could feel it. She wasn't the scheming woman anymore. She was the survivor who'd stood up to her outlaw husband in front of the whole town. They rode back to Rowan Ridge in silence, Elena's mind spinning with everything that had happened. She'd faced Silas. She'd told the truth. And somehow, impossibly, she'd won. At least for now. Clara was asleep when they arrived back at the ranch, and Pete reported that everything had been quiet. Elena picked up her daughter and held her close, breathing in that baby smell of milk and soap and safety. Thank you, she said to Caleb, for standing with me, for not letting him. You don't have to thank me for that. I told you I wasn't backing down. He smiled slightly. You were impressive today. Watching you face him down, I don't think I've ever seen anyone braver. I wasn't brave. I was desperate. Same thing, according to Martha. Elena almost laughed. She's right. She usually is. They stood there in the kitchen, the familiar space that had become home, and something shifted between them. The fear that had been driving everything, fear of Silas, fear of judgment, fear of trusting again, had loosened its grip. Not gone, but quieter. What happens now? Elena asked. Now we wait. Sheriff investigates, checks the facts, hopefully holds Silas for trial. And if he doesn't? If Silas gets out? Then we deal with it, together. Caleb moved closer. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right? When this is over, when Silas is in prison or hung or whatever happens to him, what do you want? Where do you want to be? The question caught her off guard. In all the months of running and surviving and hiding, Elena had never let herself think about after. After had seemed too impossible, too far away. I don't know, she admitted. I've been so focused on just staying alive that I haven't thought about actually living. Well, start thinking about it. Because I want you here. Not because you're scared or have nowhere else to go, but because you choose to be here. Caleb took her hand. I want to see what we could be without all this fear hanging over us. And I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other in some ways, but Elena, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Elena's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to answer now. Just think about it. Think about whether this place could be home. Not just shelter, but home. Before Elena could respond, Clara woke with a cry that demanded immediate attention. The moment broke, and Caleb stepped back with a rueful smile. I'll let you feed her. We can talk more later. He left Elena alone with her thoughts and her daughter, both of which were more complicated than she knew how to handle. The next 2 weeks passed in uneasy waiting. Sheriff Donnelly confirmed everything Elena had said. The wanted posters, the dates, the robbery descriptions all matched. Silas was formally charged and held in the Sweetwater jail pending trial. Elena gave her statement about the shooting, showed her scar to the sheriff and a doctor who documented it officially. Word spread fast. The same people who'd been whispering about Elena's character were now whispering about what Silas had done. Mrs. Patterson actually apologized to Elena in front of the general store, her face red with embarrassment. Mr. Harrison sent a note to Caleb acknowledging he'd been wrong to question Elena's presence at the ranch. The tide of public opinion had turned, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That Silas, even locked in a cell, was still dangerous. She was right. 3 weeks after his arrest, on a night when the first heavy snow of winter was falling,
Silas escaped from jail. The news came at dawn from a rider sent by Sheriff Donnelly. Silas had overpowered a deputy, stolen a horse, and disappeared into the storm. He was armed and extremely dangerous. "He'll come here," Elena said immediately. "He has nothing left to lose now. He'll come to finish it." Caleb didn't argue. He just started preparing, loading weapons, posting guards, securing the buildings. The ranch hands knew what was at stake. They'd all heard Elena's story by now, all understood that this wasn't just about an outlaw on the run. This was personal. That night, they waited. Snow fell heavy and constant, muffling sound and reducing visibility to almost nothing. Elena sat in the kitchen with Clara, the pistol loaded and ready, watching the windows for movement that might be death coming through the storm. Caleb came in periodically to check on her, his face drawn with worry. "Maybe he won't come," Elena said, though she didn't believe it. "Maybe he'll just run, head to Canada or California or somewhere far away." "Maybe," Caleb said, but he didn't believe it either. Around midnight, Diego called out a warning. "Rider approaching from the east." Everyone moved into position. Caleb grabbed his rifle and went to the porch. Elena stayed in the kitchen, heart hammering, gun in hand. Through the snow, a figure emerged on horseback, moving slowly. Not charging, not attacking, just riding up calm as Sunday morning. Silas stopped maybe 30 feet from the house and dismounted. He was covered in snow, his face pale with cold, but his eyes burned with something beyond rage. "Elena," he shouted, "I know you're in there. Come out and let's end this." "You're surrounded, Mercer," Caleb called back. "There's no way this ends well for you. Just turn around and ride away." "Ride away to what? Prison? Hanging?" Silas laughed, the sound sharp and broken. "No, I'm done running. I'm done pretending. I came here to collect what's mine, and I'm not leaving without her." "She's not yours. She never was." "The law says different. Marriage is binding, Rowan. Till death do us part." Silas pulled his gun. "So let's have death then, one way or another." "Don't do this." "Elena," Silas shouted again. "You want to hide behind men and laws and property lines? Fine. But everyone you're hiding behind is going to die because of you. Every man on this ranch, every person who tried to protect you, their blood will be on your hands. Is that what you want?" Elena felt something cold and final settle in her chest. She knew what Silas was doing, trying to draw her out, trying to make her feel guilty enough to surrender. And part of her, the part that had spent years absorbing blame for things that weren't her fault, wanted to do it, wanted to walk out there and end this so no one else would get hurt. But she remembered Caleb's words. "You're one of the strongest people I know." And she remembered her own determination on that long walk across the prairie. "I will not die today." "Caleb," she called from inside, "let me talk to him." "Elena, no. I'm not surrendering. I'm not going with him. But I need to say something." Caleb looked back at her through the open door, his face showing every argument he wanted to make. Then he nodded and stepped aside. Elena walked onto the porch, still holding her pistol, Clara asleep inside. She looked at Silas across the snowy distance and felt nothing but contempt. "You want to know why I'm hiding?" she said. "I'm not hiding. I'm living. I'm taking care of my daughter and working and building something worth having. And you? You're standing in a blizzard threatening to kill people because you can't accept that you lost." "I didn't lose anything. You're my wife." "No. I was your victim. There's a difference." Elena's voice was steady. "You shot me and left me to die because I found out what you really are. Not a charming rogue or a misunderstood man, just a coward who takes what he wants and destroys anyone who gets in his way. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing but pain and fear and shame, and even that wasn't enough for you. You had to take my life too." Elena raised her gun slightly. "Well, I survived. I'm standing here, I'm alive, and Clara's alive. And that makes me the winner, Silas, not you." Silas's face twisted with rage. "You think some cattle rancher is going to save you? You think he's going to want you once the novelty wears off? Look at yourself, Elena. You're fat and common, and I'm worth 10 of you," Elena interrupted. "Caleb knows it. The people on this ranch know it. Even the town knows it now. The only person who never saw my worth was you, and that's your loss, not mine." For a moment, just a flash, Elena saw something other than rage in Silas's face. Pain, maybe. Or regret.
The recognition that he'd thrown away something real for something worthless. Then it was gone, replaced by cold fury. "Fine," he said. "If I can't have you, no one can." He raised his gun. 3 shots rang out simultaneously, from Caleb, from Pete, from Diego. Silas jerked backward, stumbling, his gun firing wildly into the snow. He fell to his knees, then forward onto his face. The silence afterward was absolute. Elena stood frozen on the porch, gun still raised, while snow fell onto Silas's unmoving body. She waited for him to get up, to prove this was another trick, another manipulation, but he didn't move. Caleb walked slowly toward Silas, rifle ready. He checked for a pulse, then looked back at Elena and shook his head. "He's dead." 2 words that should have brought relief. Instead, Elena felt nothing, just emptiness where fear used to live. She turned and walked back into the house on numb legs, set down the gun, checked on Clara, who was still sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the violence that had just saved her mother's life. Caleb came in a few minutes later, snow melting in his hair. "Sheriff's been sent for. Pete's wrapping the body." "Elena, don't," she said quietly. "Don't ask if I'm all right. Don't ask how I feel. I don't know yet." "Okay." He moved closer but didn't touch her. "What do you need?" "Time. Just give me time to feel whatever this is." "Take all the time you need." Elena sat down heavily, staring at nothing. Silas was dead. The threat was over. She was free. So why did she feel like she was still falling? The answer came later that night, after the sheriff had taken statements and removed the body, and the ranch had finally settled into uneasy quiet. She was free, yes. But freedom was terrifying in ways captivity never had been. When you were running, you knew what you were running from. When you were hiding, you knew what you were hiding from. But when you were free, actually truly free, you had to decide what you were running toward. And Elena had no idea what that was supposed to be. The days after Silas's death felt strange and hollow, like walking through a house where all the furniture had been removed. Elena went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, caring for Clara, but everything felt muted, wrapped in cotton. She'd expected relief when Silas died, maybe even joy. Instead, she felt nothing much at all, and the numbness scared her more than the fear had. Martha noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You're grieving," Martha said one afternoon, rolling out pie dough while Elena mechanically peeled apples. "Not for him, for what you thought your life was going to be when you married him." "I hated him." "Doesn't matter, you still lost something. The idea of what marriage was supposed to mean. The person you were before he shot you. Even bad endings are still endings, and endings hurt." Elena set down the knife, her hands shaking slightly. "I should be happy. I'm free. Clara's safe. Silas can never hurt us again. Why don't I feel anything?" "Because you're exhausted. You've been running on fear and survival for months. Now that the threat's gone, your body doesn't know what to do." Martha covered the dough and turned to face Elena fully. "Give yourself time. You don't have to figure everything out today." But time felt like the enemy now. Every day that passed was another day Elena stayed at Rowan Ridge without knowing if she was supposed to leave. Another day of accepting Caleb's generosity without understanding what it meant. Another day of floating in limbo between one life and whatever came next. Caleb seemed to sense her uncertainty because he kept his distance, gave her space. They were polite to each other, careful, like they were dancing around something breakable. The easy companionship they'd built over the summer had fractured under the weight of everything that had happened. 2 weeks after Silas's death, Sheriff Donnelly came by with papers for Elena to sign. Formal statements, legal documents confirming Silas's death and releasing her from the marriage. The sheriff laid them out on the kitchen table while Elena read through them with Clara on her hip. "This one here declares you a widow," Donnelly said, pointing. "Free and clear, no legal entanglements. You can remarry if you want, own property, make your own decisions. Far as the law's concerned, you're your own woman now." Your own woman. The words should have felt liberating. Instead, they felt heavy with responsibility Elena wasn't sure she could carry. She signed the papers with shaking hands. After the sheriff left, Elena stood at the kitchen window watching snow blow across the prairie. Winter had settled in hard, the kind of cold that made your lungs hurt and your fingers numb. The ranch felt smaller in winter, closed in, like the walls were pressing closer. You're thinking about leaving. Elena turned to find Caleb in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. I don't know what I'm thinking, she admitted. That's fair. He came into the kitchen but didn't sit down, just leaned against the counter with his arms crossed. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you staying here because you want to, or because you don't know where else to go? The question cut straight to the heart of what Elena had been avoiding. She looked at Caleb, this man who'd saved her life, given her shelter, stood between her and violence without asking for anything in return, and tried to find words for the tangle of feelings in her chest. I don't know, she said quietly. And that's not fair to you. Why isn't it fair? Because you asked me to think about whether this could be home, about what we could be, and I haven't been able to think about anything except getting through each day. Elena adjusted Clara on her hip. You deserve better than someone who can't even figure out what she wants. Maybe what you want takes time to figure out. I'm patient. But for how long? How long do I get to stay here and take up space in your life while I figure out my own? Caleb pushed off from the counter and crossed to stand in front of her. Elena, you're not taking up space. You've become part of this place, part of my life. And I'm not putting a time limit on that. But what if I decide to leave? What if I wake up one day and realize I need to go somewhere else, be someone different? Then you leave, and I'll be sad as hell. But I'll live with it. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm not Silas. I'm not going to trap you or guilt you or try to make you stay through fear. If the only way to keep you here is to cage you, then I don't want you here. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice thawing. Why are you so good to me? Because you deserve good. And because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I know the timing's terrible. I know you're still processing everything that happened, but you asked me why I'm patient, and that's why. Because what I feel isn't going to change whether you stay or go. Caleb, I'm sorry, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. He stepped back, giving her space. Take all the time you need, Elena. I'll be here either way. He left before she could respond, and Elena stood alone in the kitchen with her daughter and a heart that felt too full and too empty all at once. That night, for the first time since Silas's death, Elena let herself cry. Not from fear or pain or exhaustion, but from the overwhelming weight of being loved without conditions, of being seen and valued and given space to be uncertain. She cried until Clara woke and needed feeding, and then she held her daughter and whispered the truth she'd been too scared to admit. I love him too. I'm just afraid of what that means. Clara, who had no opinions on love or fear, just grabbed at Elena's hair and made sounds that might have been words or might have been nonsense. Winter deepened, and with it came a kind of forced intimacy. When you were snowed in with the same people day after day, there was no place to hide, no room for pretending. Elena and Caleb started talking, really talking, in ways they hadn't before. Late at night, after Clara was asleep, they'd sit by the fire and share pieces of themselves they'd been holding back. Caleb told her about his brothers, about growing up poor, about the first time he'd seen this land and known he wanted to build something here. Elena told him about Missouri, about her sister's betrayals, about all the small ways she'd learned to make herself smaller to fit other people's expectations. I spent my whole life apologizing for taking up space, Elena said one night, staring into the flames, for being too big, too much, too visible. Silas made it worse, but it started long before him. You don't take up too much space. You take up exactly the right amount. That's easy to say. It's the truth. Elena, do you know what I see when I look at you? Caleb leaned forward. I see someone who survived something that should have killed her. Someone who turned a working ranch into a home. Someone who loves her daughter so fiercely it shows in everything she does. That's not too much. That's exactly right. Elena wanted to believe him. Some days she almost could. Other days the old voices crept back in. Her father's disappointment, her sister's mockery, Silas's contempt. Those voices whispered that she was fooling herself, that Caleb would eventually see what everyone else saw and regret every kind word he'd wasted on her. But slowly, painfully, Elena started to notice something. The voices were getting quieter. Not gone, maybe they'd never be gone, but quieter. And Caleb's voice was getting louder,
steadier, more real than the ghost she'd been carrying. In late January, Martha brought news that the town was planning a winter social. Dancing, food, music, one of those community gatherings meant to break up the monotony of being snowed in for months. "You should go," Martha said, kneading bread with her usual efficiency. "Both of you. Show people you're not hiding." "I'm not hiding," Elena protested.
Then prove it. Put on a nice dress, dance with Caleb. Let the whole town see you're fine. Elena looked at Caleb, who'd been listening from across the kitchen. "Do you want to go?" "If you want to go, I'll go. If you want to stay home, we'll stay home." He smiled slightly. "I'm not much of a dancer. Fair warning." "Neither am I." "Then we'll be terrible together. That's something." They went to the social, Elena in one of the dresses Martha had made for her months ago, Caleb in clean clothes with his beard trimmed. Clara stayed with Martha, who'd volunteered to watch her with the kind of firm insistence that meant arguing was pointless. The social was held in the church, the largest building in Sweetwater, with the pews pushed to the sides to make room for dancing. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and the music was loud and cheerful and slightly off-key. People stared when Elena and Caleb walked in. Of course they did. Elena had expected that, had braced herself for it. But the stares weren't quite what she'd anticipated. They weren't hostile or mocking. They were curious, speculative, like people trying to figure out a puzzle. Mrs. Patterson approached first, her face showing genuine remorse. "Mrs. Mercer, Elena, I owe you another apology, a proper one. I said terrible things about you, believed terrible things, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." Elena didn't know what to say. She'd expected judgment, not apologies. "Thank you," she finally managed. Other people followed, not everyone, but enough. The shopkeeper who'd been cold now asked about Clara. The seamstress complimented her dress. One of the other ranchers' wives invited her to a quilting circle. It wasn't acceptance, not quite, but it was something close. When the dancing started, Caleb held out his hand. "Ready to be terrible?" "As I'll ever be." They danced, and Caleb was right. He wasn't very good. He stepped on her feet twice and lost the rhythm more than once. But he was trying, and he was smiling, and when he pulled her close during a slow song, Elena felt something settle into place inside her. This was what she'd been running toward without knowing it. Not perfection, not a fairy tale ending where everything was fixed and easy. Just this. A man who danced badly and loved well, a community that could learn from its mistakes, a life that was messy and real and hers. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly, her head against Caleb's shoulder. "Ready for what?" "To stop running. To stay." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "You sure?" "No. But I'm sure enough." Elena pulled back to look at him. "I love you. I've been too scared to say it, too scared to believe it, but I do. And I want to see what we can build together." "Elena, I know it's complicated. I know people will talk. I know there's 100 reasons this might not work. But I'm tired of living afraid. I'm tired of running from happiness because I think I don't deserve it." She took a breath. "So if you're still asking if you still want this, then yes. I'm staying. I'm choosing you." Caleb didn't say anything. He just kissed her, right there in the middle of the dance floor with half of Sweetwater watching. It wasn't a careful kiss or a tentative one. It was sure and real and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, people were staring again. But this time, Elena didn't care. Let them stare. Let them talk. She'd survived worse than gossip. The proposal came a week later, on a clear winter morning when the sun turned the snow into diamonds. Caleb asked her to walk with him, and they left Clara with Martha and went out to where the land opened up wide and endless. They stood at the highest point of Rowan Ridge, looking out over the valley, and Caleb took her hand. "I want to marry you," he said. No preamble, no fancy speech, just the plain truth. "I want Clara to be my daughter in every way that matters. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one based on rescue or gratitude, but on choice, on love." Elena's throat tightened. "Caleb, I know it's fast. I know you're still healing from everything Silas did. But Elena, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're it for me. You're everything. I'm not everything, I'm just..." Elena gestured helplessly at herself. "I'm just me. Heavy and stubborn
and still figuring out who I am. Yeah, and I love every bit of that. Caleb squeezed her hand. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are, right here with me. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Elena looked at the man in front of her, this good, patient, frustrating, wonderful man, and realized she'd already made her choice weeks ago. Maybe even months ago, that first night when he'd found her bleeding and decided she was worth saving. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's face transformed with joy. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, and Elena felt lighter than she had in years. When he set her down, she was breathless and grinning. I have one condition, though. Name it. I want to be a real partner, not just your wife, your partner in running this ranch. Equal say in decisions, equal stake in the work. I won't be property again, Caleb, not even yours. I wouldn't want you to be. He cupped her face in his hands. Partners, Elena, in everything. Partners, she agreed. They married on a cold March morning with snow still on the ground and spring just beginning to show in the earliest buds. The ceremony was simple, just the ranch hands, Martha, a few people from town, and a traveling preacher who'd been passing through Sweetwater. Elena wore a new dress, cream-colored, and fitted properly to her body without apology. Clara, now 9 months old and trying to stand on wobbly legs, was held by Martha during the vows. When the preacher asked if Elena took Caleb as her husband, she looked at the man beside her and felt no fear. No doubt, just certainty. I do. And when Caleb slid the simple gold band onto her finger, Elena understood what marriage was supposed to feel like. Not a cage or a burden or a sentence, but a choice. Made freely, with open eyes, between two people who decided they were better together than apart. The celebration afterward was modest. Food, music, laughter. Pete got drunk and told embarrassing stories about Caleb's early days on the ranch. Tom danced with every woman there, including Martha, who tolerated it with good humor. Diego gave Elena a carved wooden toy for Clara, his face showing rare emotion. You've been good for this place, he said quietly. For all of us. Thank you. I think you all saved me more than I saved you, Elena replied. Maybe we saved each other. Maybe that's how it works. As the sun set over Rowan Ridge, Elena stood on the porch with Caleb's arm around her waist and Clara asleep against her shoulder. She looked out at the land that had become home and felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Peace, not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. There would be hard work ahead, difficult seasons, probably more judgment from people who'd never understand. But standing there with her husband and her daughter, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her, Elena realized something profound. She wasn't the woman who'd been shot and left to die on the prairie anymore. She wasn't defined by Silas's cruelty or her father's disappointment or a lifetime of being told she was too much. She was Elena Rowan, wife, mother, partner in one of the strongest ranches in the territory, a woman who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes. Happy? Caleb asked softly. Elena smiled, pressed a kiss to Clara's sleeping head, and leaned into her husband's warmth. Getting there, she said. Getting there. Getting there turned out to be harder than Elena expected. Marriage didn't magically fix everything, despite what the romantic stories claimed. The morning after the wedding, Elena woke up in Caleb's bed, their bed now, and felt a spike of panic so sharp it stole her breath. This was real. She'd committed herself to another man, to another future, and what if she'd made the same mistake twice? Caleb must have felt her tense because he rolled over and looked at her in the early light. You regretting it already? No, maybe. I don't know. Elena sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. What if I'm not good at this? Being a wife again? You were never really a wife before. You were a hostage who happened to be married. Caleb sat up beside her. This is different. We're different. But what if I mess it up? What if I... Elena. He took her hand. We're going to mess it up. Both of us. Multiple times. That's what marriage is. Two people stumbling through life together and trying not to kill each other in the process. Despite her anxiety, Elena almost smiled. That's a terrible description of marriage. It's an honest one. And honestly,
I'd rather stumble with you than walk smooth with anyone else." The panic didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. Elena leaned against Caleb's shoulder and let herself breathe. This was going to take time, maybe a lot of time, but at least she wasn't doing it alone. Spring came slowly that year, winter fighting hard before finally releasing its grip. As the snow melted and green started showing through the brown, Elena threw herself into ranch work with renewed purpose. She wasn't just helping anymore, she was building, making decisions, implementing changes, turning Rowan Ridge into something more efficient and profitable. She reorganized the entire supply system, cutting costs without sacrificing quality. She negotiated better prices with buyers in Cheyenne. She started a garden that would provide vegetables year-round. She even began teaching Clara to walk, the baby taking wobbling steps between furniture while Elena cheered her on. The ranch hands noticed the changes and adapted. Pete started asking Elena's opinion on herd management. Tom brought his bookkeeping questions to her instead of Caleb. Diego, who'd barely spoken 10 words to anyone in the months before Elena arrived, now came to the house for coffee and conversation. "You've made this place feel different," Martha observed one afternoon while they worked on preserving early spring vegetables. "More alive somehow." "I'm just doing what needs doing."
No, you're doing more than that. You're making it a home instead of just a business. Martha sealed a jar with practiced efficiency. "Caleb's been out here 10 years, but it took you to turn this ranch into something worth coming back to at the end of the day." Elena didn't know how to respond to that, so she focused on the vegetables and tried not to think about what would have happened if Caleb had ridden past that night, if she died on the prairie like Silas intended. Sometimes the weight of that alternate ending pressed down on her, all the life she would have missed, all the moments that never would have existed. She'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced she was back in that dying moment. Then Caleb would pull her close and remind her she was here, she was safe, she was alive. But the nightmares didn't stop. If anything, they got worse as spring turned to summer. In June, Elena had a breakdown. It started small, trouble sleeping, appetite gone, everything feeling too heavy to manage. She kept working because work was what you did, kept smiling because people expected it, kept pretending she was fine because admitting otherwise felt like failure. Then one morning she couldn't get out of bed. Just couldn't. Her body refused to move. Her mind refused to cooperate. And she lay there staring at the ceiling while Clara cried in her crib and the sun climbed higher. Caleb found her like that when he came in from morning chores. He took one look at her face and sent for Martha, took Clara to be fed, and sat beside the bed without saying anything. "I can't do this," Elena whispered finally. "I thought I could, but I can't." "Can't do what?" "Any of it. Be a wife, be a mother, run a ranch. I'm not strong enough." "You're the strongest person I know. Then why do I feel like I'm breaking?" Elena turned her face away. "Why can't I just be happy? Why can't I just move on and forget what happened?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My brother Daniel, the one who died in the war, he came home once on leave, spent 2 weeks here before going back, and the whole time he was different, jumpy, angry, couldn't sleep. My mother asked him what was wrong, and he said he didn't know how to be the person he was before after everything he'd seen." "What happened to him?" "He went back to the war. Died 3 months later at Shiloh." Caleb's voice was rough. "I used to wonder if he wanted to die, if staying alive after what he'd been through was just too hard." Elena looked at him then, saw the old pain in his eyes. "But here's what I learned," Caleb continued. "Surviving something terrible doesn't mean you're fixed. It means you're still fighting, and some days the fight is harder than others. That doesn't make you weak, Elena. It makes you human." "I don't know how to keep fighting." "Then don't. Not today. Today you rest. Tomorrow you can decide if you want to fight or rest again, and the day after that, you can decide again. One day at a time." Martha arrived and shooed Caleb out, then sat with Elena and didn't demand explanations or solutions. Just sat there, solid and present, while Elena cried for the first time since the wedding. "I thought getting married would fix me," Elena said through tears. "I thought love would be enough to erase everything Silas did." "Love doesn't erase trauma. It just gives you a reason to keep going through it." Martha handed her a handkerchief. "You've been surviving for so long that you forgot how to actually live. Now you're trying to learn, and that's hard work. Harder than surviving sometimes." How do I learn?
Same way you learn anything. Badly at first, then less badly, then eventually you get the hang of it. Martha stood. Now, you're going to stay in this bed until you feel like getting up. Could be an hour, could be 3 days. Doesn't matter. The ranch will run without you, Clara will be fed, and Caleb will be here when you're ready. It took 2 days. 2 days of sleeping and crying and letting other people take care of things. 2 days of Caleb bringing meals she barely touched and sitting with her without demanding conversation. 2 days of Martha handling Clara and the household while Pete and Tom managed the ranch. On the 3rd day, Elena got up, not because she felt better, she didn't, but because she'd remembered something important. Survival wasn't about feeling strong all the time. It was about getting up even when you didn't feel strong at all. She came into the kitchen to find Caleb making breakfast badly. Eggs burned in the pan, coffee too weak, bacon somehow both raw and crispy. "You're terrible at this," Elena said. Caleb turned, his face flooding with relief. "You're up." "I'm up." She moved to the stove and took over, her hands remembering the familiar motions. "And you're banned from cooking unsupervised. Fair enough?" He watched her work for a moment. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." Elena cracked fresh eggs into the pan. Eventually, that became their reality. Not perfect happiness, but honest struggle towards something better. There were good days when Elena felt strong and capable. There were bad days when getting out of bed felt impossible. There were in-between days when she functioned but didn't thrive. Caleb learned to recognize which kind of day it was and adjusted accordingly. On good days, they worked side by side and made plans for the ranch's future. On bad days, he took over Elena's responsibilities without complaint. On in-between days, they just existed together, neither pushing nor retreating. It wasn't the marriage Elena had imagined. It was better, more real, built on truth instead of fantasy. By late summer, something shifted. Elena woke one morning and realized she'd slept through the night without nightmares. Clara was pulling herself up on furniture and babbling in sounds that were almost words. The ranch was thriving, cattle healthy, accounts balanced, harvest looking good. And Elena felt something she hadn't felt in over a year: hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the quiet hope of someone who believes the future might actually be worth seeing. That afternoon, while Clara napped and Caleb was out checking fences, Elena sat on the porch and thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The shooting, the long walk, the months of fear and uncertainty, Silas's death and her wedding, and the slow, painful work of learning to live instead of just survive. She thought about the woman she'd been in Missouri, small and ashamed, apologizing for existing, accepting scraps of affection from a man who'd never loved her. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone Elena had known once but no longer recognized. The woman she was now was harder, sharper, less willing to bend, but also more open, more capable of joy, more willing to believe she deserved good things. Silas had tried to kill her. Instead, he'd freed her. The thought should have felt wrong, too neat, too much like saying the trauma was worth it. But Elena had learned that truth was rarely neat. She could hate what Silas had done and still be grateful for what she'd become because of it. Both things could be true at once. "You're thinking loud," Caleb said, and Elena turned to find him on the porch steps, watching her. Just reflecting. On what? How different everything is from a year ago. How different I am. Elena gestured toward the ranch spread out before them. "A year ago I was dying on a prairie. Now I'm sitting on my own porch watching my husband work my land." "Our land." "Our land," Elena corrected with a smile. "See? Even that's different. I have an hour now." Caleb climbed the steps and sat beside her. "Any regrets?" "About marrying you?" "No." "About everything else?" Elena considered. "I regret trusting Silas. I regret not leaving sooner. I regret all the years I spent hating myself for not fitting into boxes other people built. But I don't regret ending up here." "Even with the nightmares? The hard days?" "Even with those. Because the alternative was dying. And this," Elena waved at the ranch, at the life they'd built. "This is better than dying." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the sky. Clara woke with a cry, and Elena went to get her, bringing her daughter back to the porch. Clara had Silas's dark hair, but everything else was pure Elena. Sturdy build, determined expression, the look of someone who wouldn't back down easy. "She's going to be strong," Caleb observed, watching Clara grab at Elena's hair. "She's going to have to be. Life out here doesn't coddle anyone."
True, but she'll have something you didn't have growing up. What's that? Parents who think she's perfect exactly as she is, no matter what size she grows to, no matter what shape she takes. Caleb touched Clara's cheek gently. She'll never have to apologize for existing. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You're going to spoil her. Absolutely. That's what fathers do. The word fathers reminded Elena of something she'd been meaning to discuss. I want to tell her the truth, when she's old enough, about Silas and how we met and everything that happened. You sure? That's a heavy story for a kid. I'm sure. I don't want her growing up with lies, even comfortable ones. She deserves to know where she came from. Elena adjusted Clara on her lap. But I also want her to know that biology doesn't define family, that you're her real father in every way that matters. I'd be honored to be Clara's father, in every way. Caleb cleared his throat. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that, about making it official, adopting her legally so there's no question. You want to adopt her? I want her to be mine, ours, completely and legally, and in every way the law recognizes. He looked at Elena. If that's all right with you. Elena couldn't speak for a moment. She just nodded, tears spilling over, and let Caleb pull her close while Clara squirmed between them. This was family, not blood or obligation or legal contracts, though those had their place. But choice. People choosing each other over and over, building something real from nothing but determination and love. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were good. Clara grew into a bright, stubborn child who had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to share them. She called Caleb Papa from the moment she could form the word and never questioned that he was anything other than her father. The adoption went through without complications, making it official in the eyes of the law. 2 years after their wedding, Elena had another baby, a boy they named Daniel after Caleb's brother. He was smaller than Clara had been, quieter, with Caleb's eyes and Elena's determination. Then came another daughter, Ruth, who screamed her way into the world and never quite stopped making noise. The ranch expanded. They bought adjacent land, increased the herd, built new outbuildings. Elena's management turned Rowan Ridge into one of the most profitable operations in the territory. Other ranchers started asking for her advice. Women from town came to learn her bookkeeping system. Slowly, grudgingly, the community that had once judged her so harshly began to respect her. It wasn't universal. Mrs. Patterson remained cool, though civil. A few families never quite forgave Elena for whatever imagined sins they'd assigned her. But most people came around eventually, won over by Elena's competence and Caleb's unwavering support. Martha remained a constant presence, helping with the children and running the household with the same efficient directness she applied to everything. Pete retired to a small cabin on the property where he could fish and drink coffee and dispense unsolicited advice. Tom married a girl from town and built a house near the ranch. Diego stayed on, eventually bringing his own wife and children to live in an expanded bunkhouse. Rowan Ridge became more than a ranch. It became a community, a place where people chose to stay not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And Elena, the woman who'd once been shot and left to die, became the heart of it all. On the 5-year anniversary of the night Caleb found her, Elena and Caleb rode out to where the wagon tracks used to be. The ruts had long since been overgrown, erased by rain and wind and the relentless march of time. But Elena still knew the spot where she'd heard hoofbeats and thought she was hallucinating rescue. You ever think about how different things would be if you'd ridden a different route that night? Elena asked. Every day. But I didn't ride a different route. I rode this one, and I found you, and everything after that is what it is. Everything after that is pretty good. Yeah, Caleb smiled. It really is. They stood in the fading light, watching the sun set over land that was theirs, earned through work and will, and the simple refusal to give up. Elena thought about the woman she'd been, broken and bleeding and sure she was going to die. That woman would never have believed this future was possible. But then, that woman had never learned the most important truth. Survival wasn't about being strong all the time. It was about getting up after you fell, about choosing to keep going when stopping would be easier,
about believing you deserved a life worth living even when everything in your past said otherwise. Elena had learned that lesson the hard way. But she'd learned it, and now she was teaching it to her children, not through lectures or sermons, but through living. Through showing them that women could be strong and soft, capable and uncertain, broken and whole all at once. That bodies came in different shapes, and all of them were worthy of respect. That love wasn't about possession or control, but about choosing someone freely every single day. "Mama, Papa, come back, dinner's ready," Clara's voice carried across the prairie, impatient and demanding. She was 10 now, tall for her age, and built solid like her mother. She'd never lived a day believing she was too much or too big. She just existed, confident and loud and completely herself. "We should go," Caleb said, "before she decides to come drag us back herself." "She would too. Gets that from me."
Gets a lot from you.
Caleb helped Elena onto her horse, a courtesy, not a necessity. She'd become an excellent rider over the years. All the best parts. They rode back toward the ranch house, its windows glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Daniel would be attempting to help Martha with dinner while actually making more mess. Ruth would be singing some nonsensical song at the top of her lungs. The ranch hands would be washing up, ready to eat. Home. This was home. Not because the house was beautiful or the land was perfect or life was easy, but because these people, this loud, messy, complicated family, had chosen each other and kept choosing each other through everything that came. That night, after dinner, and after putting the children to bed, and after all the small rituals that made up a life, Elena stood at her bedroom window looking out at the stars. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am. How close I came to missing all of this." "You're not lucky. You're strong. You survived when most people wouldn't have." "Maybe, but I also got lucky that you found me, that you chose to help instead of riding past." Elena turned in his arms to face him. "I never thanked you properly for that. You thank me every day. Every morning you wake up in this bed, every meal you cook, every time you laugh with the kids. That's thanks enough." "Is it? Because I'm not sure I could ever thank you enough for giving me a life worth living." "Elena," Caleb cupped her face in his hands, "you gave yourself that life. I just helped a little at the beginning. Everything after, the ranch, the family, the happiness, that's all you. You chose to keep living. You chose to take what happened to you and turn it into something good. That wasn't me. That was always you." Elena kissed him then, pouring 5 years of gratitude and love and hard-won peace into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "I choose you," she whispered. "Every day, every moment, I choose you. I choose you too, always." They stood there in the quiet of their room, holding each other while the ranch settled into sleep around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always challenges. Cattle to manage, children to raise, accounts to balance, the endless work of keeping a ranch running. But tomorrow would also bring small joys. Clara's laugh, Daniel's serious questions, Ruth's enthusiastic chaos, coffee at sunrise and dinner around a crowded table and the simple satisfaction of work well done. Tomorrow would bring life. Real life. The kind Elena had once thought was reserved for other people. And she was ready for it. The prairie wind moved through the cottonwoods outside, carrying the smell of grass and earth and promise. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed softly. A horse whinnied. The ranch breathed around them, alive and thriving. Elena Rowan, survivor, wife, mother, rancher, closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of contentment. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too light, too temporary. This was something deeper, something earned. This was peace, the kind of peace that came from knowing you'd fought for every good thing in your life and won, the kind that came from surviving the worst and choosing to believe in better, the kind that settled into your bones and stayed. Years later, when Clara asked about her origins, Elena told her the truth, all of it, the shooting, the long walk, the fear and pain and desperate survival. Clara listened with wide eyes, and when Elena finished, she was quiet for a long time. "So Silas was my blood father," Clara finally said. But Papa Caleb is my real father. What makes you say that? Elena asked. Because real family is the one that stands beside you when the world turns away. You told me that once. Clara smiled. Papa stood beside you. That makes him real. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You're right. That's exactly what makes him real. And it makes you the strongest person I know, Clara continued. Because you survived something terrible and turned it into something beautiful. You made a family from nothing. You built a home where there was just dirt and grass. You did all that. We did all that. Your papa and I together. But you started it. You're the one who refused to die on that prairie. Everything after came from that choice. Clara hugged her mother fiercely. I'm proud to be your daughter. Blood or not, I'm proud. That night, Elena told Caleb about the conversation. She's right, you know, Caleb said. You did start all of this. That night when you kept walking instead of lying down to die, that was the beginning of everything we have now.
I didn't know I was starting anything. I was just trying to survive.
Maybe that's how all good things begin. Someone deciding to take one more step when stopping would be easier. Elena thought about that, about all the steps she'd taken since that night. The painful ones and the joyful ones and the 1,000 small steps in between that had carried her from dying on a prairie to living on a thriving ranch, surrounded by people she loved. Then I'm glad I kept walking, she said finally. I'm glad every step brought me here. Me too, Caleb said. Me too. The story of Elena Mercer, who became Elena Rowan and in doing so became herself, didn't end with dramatic flourishes or perfect resolutions. It ended the way most real stories do, with ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life, with small moments of joy and struggle and stubborn perseverance, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing you'd taken something broken and made it whole. The woman who'd been shot and left to die didn't die. She lived. She thrived. She built a life so full and rich that sometimes she had to stop and remind herself it was real. And on clear nights when the stars came out over Wyoming, Elena would stand on her porch and look out at everything she'd created. The ranch, the family, the home, the life she'd fought for with every breath. And she'd smile, because she'd learned the most important truth of all. You're never too broken to build something beautiful. Never too damaged to deserve happiness. Never too much, or too big, or too anything to take up space in the world. You just have to choose to keep walking, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when dying would be easier than taking one more step. You keep walking, and eventually, if you're stubborn enough and lucky enough and brave enough, you find home.